On the blood-stained floor lay a severed head, and the crimson puddles dimly reflected the gloomy light. A huge army of martial arts masters approached the monumental temple under the blood-red sky. The sect leaders froze with tension, anticipating the approach of an unprecedented threat. They looked with horror at the courtyard, strewn with the mutilated bodies of their warriors. The old monk humbly folded his hands, quietly pleading for mercy for the souls of the fallen. One of the leaders shouted in panic that only a demon could have caused such a massacre, when suddenly everyone noticed movement. A solitary dark figure slowly walked through the gate, leaving behind mountains of corpses. Heavy footsteps echoed among the falling bloody petals. The bloodied swordsman coldly stated that the mighty sect of MANHUA was completely destroyed. The last surviving leader croaked distrustfully that all this was done by only one person. At that moment, the space was torn apart by a devastating flash of crimson energy. The masters panicked, frantically shouting orders to immediately take defensive positions. A destructive, bloody wave mercilessly sliced through the air and those who stood in its path. A squad of warriors desperately rushed into a joint counterattack on the monster. However, the killer's blade was faster, ruthlessly spraying blood from the slashed throats. A dazzling strike instantly cut the next master into two pieces. The gray-bearded leader roared fiercely, demanding the freak to show himself immediately. In the dead silence, only the sound of a solitary step on the damp earth was heard. From the darkness emerged a silhouette firmly holding a severed head by the hair. The leaders of the powerful sects Chinkin and Namgun grimly clenched their teeth, preparing for a deadly battle. Representatives of Shaolin and Wudang also tensed, realizing the scale of the tragedy. A shirtless young man confidently remarked that they had brought an entire army with them. A desperate voice from the crowd hysterically asked who he was and why he committed this massacre. Another severed head flew to the ground, demonstrating the killer's absolute indifference. The young man cold-bloodedly concluded that rumors should not be trusted. A lightning-fast movement left behind only a blurred, bloody trail. The masters recognized with incredible horror the leader of the mighty Hua Mountain in the slain man. The killer firmly caught the sword and mockingly threw it, saying it was time to finish since all the targets had gathered together. He confidently assumed that these opponents would turn out to be stronger than the previous ones. The old master, with a fierce battle cry, was the first to rush into the attack, raising his blade high. Other leaders joined, promising to avenge the fallen at any cost. Colorful flashes of the highest energy struck from all sides, but the boy only sighed in disappointment. Suddenly, the bloody reality began to break down into digital pixels, revealing the maniacal smile of a player in a VR headset. He abruptly took off the virtual reality helmet, returning to the real world. The young man exhaled heavily, sitting on the couch in a dimly lit room. Rubbing his neck, he thoughtfully wondered whether the joint attack of so many enemies had truly been fatal for him. Next to the helmet on the table lay a box with the inscription, Muram Online. It was a recently released game, notorious for its hyper-realistic cruelty and detailed dismemberment. Servers were overwhelmed by petitions from outraged users demanding the immediate shutdown of the project. But the boy only enthusiastically admitted that no other such brilliant entertainment simply exists. Watching the news broadcast, he decided that next time he would act much more quietly. From the television screen, the newscaster urgently reported on the mysterious disappearance of the CEO of a large corporation. The gamer grimly said that a classic murder is also a good tool. Suddenly, the frame changed to a raw basement, where someone's pitiful voice begged for mercy. The silhouette of the boy towered over the captive, illuminated only by the cold glow of the monitor. The beaten and tightly bound man knelt, begging to be spared his life. His face was completely distorted by animal fear and despair. The young man with a heavy sledgehammer on his shoulder looked impassively at his worthless victim. He roughly grabbed the man by the jaw, mockingly asking if he really expected forgiveness. The prisoner began to hysterically justify himself, tearfully swearing his innocence. The avenger looked coldly at the maniac, gripping the weapon's handle more comfortably. Instead of an answer, he threw a stack of photographs in his face with horrifying scenes of torture of girls committed by this scoundrel. Tightly gripping the sledgehammer, the boy calmly explained that innocent people never become his prey. Realizing that lying was pointless, the killer sobbed uncontrollably, shouting about deep repentance. The young man clutched the maniac's hair with a death grip, hissing that pleas only irritate him. In the thick darkness, his icy smile flashed predatorily. He barely audibly added that the conversation between the two of them would always be short. Raising the bloodied sledgehammer high, the boy admitted that this routine was already starting to bore him. The air was cut by a lightning flash of light as the heavy weapon swiftly went down. The basement shook from a piercing scream as steel mercilessly shattered bones. Suddenly, the Avengers sharply jumped aside, barely avoiding the unexpected counterattack. The prisoner's bound hands tensed with incredible strength, trying to break free. Thick plastic zip ties shattered loudly into pieces. Gnashing his teeth in rage, the criminal promised to destroy his executioner. The freed psychopath charged forward with a wild roar, swinging a torn-off sledgehammer. His gaze filled with pure blood and primal madness from the desire to kill. The atmosphere in the room intensified to a deadly limit. The space warped from tension. But the boy rapidly closed the distance, enveloped in a dark, deadly aura. He delivered a devastating punch straight to the enemy's face, tearing through the air. Powerful purple energy mercilessly burst from his body, sweeping away everything in its path. The criminal flew backward like a light rag doll from the incredible force of the collision. His massive body crashed into the concrete floor with a deafening roar. From the broken mouth of the maniac, blood poured out, and his eyes rolled back from the pain shock. Losing all his false bravado, he miserably crawled back, begging to be kept away. True horror paralyzed his mind, and he frantically screamed that he did not want to die. In the deathly silence, a cold thought of the young man sounded that most people are just weak herbivores. But among this gray mass, there is always a small number of predators hiding. The beaten killer helplessly pressed himself against the cold wall, realizing that this was the end. Such monsters attack and hunt exclusively those who are weaker than themselves. They live only to devour defenseless fates. The boy slowly approached his miserable victim, ignoring the dozens of packed corpses around. And it is for such bloodthirsty beasts that he voluntarily became the sole hunter. His eerie shadow covered the psychopath, and his right eye brightly flashed in the darkness. He coldly looked at the one who was always used to hunting others. Cornered in a dead end, the criminal hysterically shouted for the Avenger not to come closer. Losing the last remnants of reason from panic, the maniac began biting his own hands until they bled. Suddenly, a bloodied sledgehammer flew away with a whistle, crashing off the wall with a rumble. The air was suddenly cut by the dazzling light from police flashlights. An elite squad of armed special forces burst rapidly into the basement, taking the room under aim. Dozens of barrels aimed at the young man. A harsh order to freeze on the spot was heard. The stern voice of the commander clearly named his real name, Donbon Su. An experienced detective in a rumpled suit decisively reached for his service weapon. Aiming the pistol, the cop officially announced the arrest for kidnapping and illegal detention. Hearing the accusation of murder, Bonsu calmly pondered how the police had even found his hideout. The detective took the weapon off the safety, warning that he would shoot live rounds to kill. The young man's red eye slid over the hole from the previous bullet in the wall, lightning fast, analyzing the trap. Unarmed Avenger found himself face to face with a whole army of trained law enforcement officers. He calmly noted to himself that this hopeless situation strangely resembled recent events from the game. An absolutely brazen, crazy smile slowly spread across his face. The cop tensely asked if the guy realized the full scale of the horror he had committed. The captured maniac looked at the police in despair, pitifully hoping for rescue from his executioner. The detective, with undisguised anger, listed the gruesome details about the torture and post-mortem photos of innocent women. Then the policeman pointed to the packed bodies, emphasizing that they were all killers just like that. Bonsu coldly replied that these monsters were real beasts who hunted the weak with impunity, and he was just a lone hunter methodically cleansing this world of them. His heavy gaze expressed no remorse, showing only icy confidence. The beaten maniac hysterically shouted, begging the cops to shoot this crazy psychopath instead of him. The detective slowly lit a cigarette without lowering his weapon and disdainfully exhaled smoke with a sarcastic question. He shook his head, acknowledging that he saw before him not a noble hero, but another serial butcher. Bonsu's eye narrowed from sheer boredom and deep disappointment. Throwing back his head, the young man sighed theatrically, finally convinced that a constructive dialogue with the cops was impossible. The space around the boy began to ominously distort from the concentration of his deadly aura. The detective burst out in a panic scream, demanding to freeze immediately on the spot. But the young man had already turned into a blurred shadow, rushing forward in a black whirlwind. A deafening shot rang out, and blood splattered brightly in all directions from the furious collision of bodies. The young man's face contorted with hellish pain, but he stubbornly pushed through the dense fire. Losing consciousness, he dreamed of finding a place where he could freely kill beasts, the true world of Murim. The space split with a dazzling vertical pillar of light, erasing any boundaries between reality and the game. A blue flash tore through the darkness as the boy's body began to dissolve into digital energy. With a loud convulsive gasp, he opened his eyes, spitting out water and not believing he had miraculously survived. A stern elderly man in traditional attire remarked with surprise that this brat turned out to be remarkably resilient. Bonsu's eye widened in complete shock and incomprehension of what was happening. Dazzling white light filled consciousness as unbearable pain pierced his entire new body. The stranger brusquely grabbed him by the dirty collar of his tattered rags. Bringing his fierce face closer, the man angrily asked if the boy understood the effort it took to pull him out of the market. Raising his heavy calloused fist, the old man seriously threatened to finish off this ungrateful bastard right now. Finally, the stranger disgustedly threw him away and, coldly saying goodbye, vanished into the darkness. Left alone in the damp room, the boy slowly blinked his glowing crimson eye. Dead silence unbearably pressed on his temples as the body tried to recover from the wounds. The boy watched the man leave, barely standing and leaning against the wall. Suddenly, his weak body was pierced by a powerful purple lightning of alien energy. The youth helplessly fell to his knees, choking on bloody coughs and cursing his new physical weakness. Consciousness again began to treacherously fade in the dense darkness of the room. But suddenly he noticed something extremely strange, freezing in shock with surprise. In complete silence, he could hear only his own accelerated heartbeat and heavy breathing. Looking at himself, the boy realized a terrible truth. This frail shell did not belong to him. He sat critically exhausted with sunken ribs, yet tightly wrapped in a demonic dark aura. A clear thought flashed through his mind about the incredible fact of soul transmigration. With trembling fingers, he carefully touched the deep scars on his abdomen, trying to understand their origin. Peeking out the open window, he instantly caught his breath at the sight of the landscape. Under the pale light of the full moon stretched a monumental residence, the architecture of which was an exact copy from his game. From his pale lips escaped a quiet, deeply shocked question about whether this was really Murim. Impenetrable darkness for a moment completely concealed the storm of his emotions. The boy knelt before the window, mesmerized, gazing into the dazzling night glow of the new world. He desperately grabbed his head, trying to accept this absolutely impossible reality. Bending low to the very floor, the young man began to tremble slightly from overstrain. Hot tears poured from his eyes as he realized that his most cherished desire to become a hunter had come true. Suddenly, a familiar system message with his gaming name flashed brightly before his eyes. The system coldly welcomed him to the world of the truly strong, Murim Online. The exhausted young man's face instantly twisted into a mad, predatory smile that promised real bloody hell for all the local beasts. Pitchforks scraped sharply against the dirty stone floor of the stable. In the dim room, only the heavy breathing of the horse echoed. The exhausted young man monotonously raked the hay without even raising his head. Suddenly, a massive silhouette appeared in the light-filled doorway, roughly calling him by name. The boy shuddered and, stammering with fear, obediently greeted Master Machil. He disgustedly covered his nose from the stench of horse manure and unequivocally ordered him to follow. The young man cautiously tried to object that he had not yet finished cleaning the stalls. At that very moment, a dark aura enveloped the man, and he cruelly grabbed the boy by the face. Coming up close, the attacker hissed that his words were an order, not a request. A powerful blow threw the young man aside with a contemptuous reminder that the Donri clan simply allows such an orphan to eat and sleep. Leaning over the beaten one, the man barked that the boy was just a miserable slave who had forgotten his place. In response, only empty, completely dead eyes of the young man stared from the darkness. Later, near the weaponsmith's counter, piled with blades, a new figure appeared. The big guy Dongo pushed the beaten boy toward the old master, who was surprised by Manchul's absence. The fat man, with a sly smile, explained that their older brother was amusing himself again in the tavern. Clicking his fingers above the barely alive young man's head, he hinted at drinking. The old weaponsmith anxiously noted that carrying such a mountain of weapons together would be too difficult. Dongo just laughed loudly, assuring that they had the perfect tool for that. With a swing, he struck the young man on the back of the head, calling him a simple pack animal. The boy fell to the ground with a harsh cough, and the gunsmith anxiously asked what they were doing with poor Sosam. Ignoring it, Dongo carelessly waved his hand, recalling his own meeting at the tavern. Wishing him success, he left the exhausted young man lying face down in the dust. The old master could only watch him with sympathy. Under the blood-red sky, the boy barely dragged a huge bag of weapons on himself, which finally crashed to the ground. The crimson twilight wrapped the roofs of the residence in a thick cover. The gunsmith thanked the young man for the work, but horrified noted that he looked simply terrible. He said directly that the boy's face resembled that of a corpse. So Sam, whose gaze was empty and extinguished, quietly muttered that he was fine. Shuddering from the piercing cold, he limped through the red streets, while voices from the past called him like an echo. His face was hidden in the shadow of deep despair and hopelessness. In memories, a giant appeared, mockingly asking why the young man should continue this miserable insect life. The boy's dull gaze testified to a complete loss of hope. A mad brute with burning eyes blocked his way, ordering him to get lost. The young man only pitifully apologized, bowing his head. The response was a devastating blow that tore through the darkness. In the void, he mentally asked himself when exactly everything went wrong. He recalled another cruel kick that threw his body away like a rag. He pondered whether it began when his entire family died in a storm, and he remained the sole survivor. A gigantic fist mercilessly pressed him into the ground. Or perhaps it happened the day he knocked on the gates of the Danri clan for survival. A heavy wooden stick continued breaking his bones. In the end, he concluded that the world around was simply too cold. Thick darkness had completely engulfed his consciousness. From there came only faint pleas for rescue and a crumb of food. He lay curled up in a ball in the middle of the bottomless, bloody gloom. The only source of light remained a small, barred window under the stable ceiling. Pressing against the wall, the boy trembled from the pain he had experienced. Exhausted, he barely stood on his feet, leaning on the wooden partition in front of the indifferent horses. Looking at his broken reflection in the water trough, he remembered that the true name of this body was Sam. A sharp cough interrupted his thoughts, making him clutch his broken ribs. The young man stood alone in the beam of light that pierced through the bars. He slowly turned his head, immersed in his own guesses. The boy's eyes sharply narrowed with realization. The real Sam was beaten to death by these freaks. Suddenly, his gaze was caught by something unusual in the air. Right in front of him, a holographic blue system window flashed, filled with question marks. The glowing text solemnly welcomed him to the world of the truly strong, the Muram online system. The next day, under a cloudless sky, the magnificent pagodas of the clan towered. Mashil carried a bowl of food, irritably complaining about his fate and the necessity to clean up horse manure. He grumbled that the boy could simply go home after work. The man mentally cursed the youth for attracting the attention of Du Ryan, whom he considered a real psychopath. In the overseer's imagination appeared the image of this muscular monster with a cruel smile. He justified himself by saying that just in case he had sent Dong-O with the boy. Continuing to be angry, Machil indignantly wondered why such a big man had to clean up after some idiot. The man's face twisted with anger, and his eyes gleamed predatory in the shadow. For a moment, a dark thought flashed through his mind to kill the boy with his own hands. But he quickly dismissed the idea, realizing the risk was too great. Grimacing with irritation, the man loudly clicked his tongue. Kicking down the stable door, he thought that if he failed, his head would be the first to roll off his shoulders. Howling with anger, he threw a bowl of broth straight at the boy, shouting that he was alive, only to annoy him. The wooden bowl bounced off the floor near the exhausted youth with a clatter. So Sam raised his gaze, and there was not a drop of fear or despair in his eyes. Sitting on the floor with the pitiful remains of food, he noted that 2 weeks had already passed since his awakening in this world. The youth's face remained hidden in shadow while his brain actively analyzed the situation. He began mentally organizing all the information gathered from the overseers and the surrounding environment. Through the open door, the boy carefully watched the mass training of armed warriors in the courtyard. He noted that the locals used Hanzi characters, but this place was definitely not China. Dozens of swordsmen synchronously practiced stances and strikes under the instructor's supervision. The youth knew the exact reason for this anomaly. Before his eyes, one of the masters made an incredible superhuman leap over the ranks of fighters. These were martial arts techniques he had previously seen only in movies and fantasy novels. In the darkness, the boy's eyes flashed with the crimson light of a predator. He realized that in this dimension, martial arts were an absolute reality. The soldiers, with furious cries, continued to slash the air with their blades. The second important fact he noted was the mysterious system glowing before him. The young man intently stared at the blue status window, where all his parameters, strength, agility, intelligence, and defense, were displayed with unknown values. For some reason, the game interface worked flawlessly, and only he had access to it. At first, through this system and magical techniques, it seemed to him that he was simply stuck in virtual reality. However, clenching his own bones until they cracked, the young man felt a throbbing pain and was finally convinced that this was real life. All the locals had their own emotions. They were living beings of flesh and blood. Gazing at his reflection next to the system window, he wondered, who was he now? An ordinary person or a player? Leaning back, the boy ironically smiled at his own thoughts. His reflections were interrupted by Dong-O, who peered into the door with a disgusting smile, mocking how luxuriously So-Sam lived. The fat man instantly became angry, accusing the boy of being the reason he was brutally beaten and punished, and sternly asked if he had made him wait. A gigantic shadow loomed over the exhausted body of the young man sitting on the floor. The tormentor mercilessly grabbed his victim by the collar, preparing for a beating. Suddenly, the boy's hands swiftly grabbed the bowl of food. With a wild aura, he greedily drank it all to the last drop, gathering the last crumbs of energy. Dong-O exploded with rage, promising to tear the freak apart, but at that moment the boy's eyes flared red, and with incredible speed he stabbed a sharp shard straight into the attacker's hand. Blood splattered everywhere, and a terrible gurgle escaped from the fat man's throat as the boy's fingers crushed his Adam's apple with a death grip. The man's bloodshot eyes bulged from unbearable pain and suffocation. From the impenetrable darkness, only the boy's demonic pupils shone, who cold-bloodedly declared that the former So-Sam had long been dead. A beastly growl burst from the boy's chest, filling the room with primal horror. Dong-O wheezed, desperately trying to break free, but the enemy's predatory aura left no chances. A crunch sounded, and blood splattered onto the young man's face after a devastating blow. A black silhouette with a burning gaze continued to strike, slicing the air with crimson flashes. Each new move sprayed liters of blood, turning the slaughter into a bloody meat grinder. The boy towered over the mangled body, and around him swirled a sinister energy of murder. An unrelenting series of blows finally turned the enemy into a piece of dead flesh. With closed eyes and a blood-soaked face, the young man breathed heavily, calming his pulse. Looking at the blood-red sky, he again mentally asked himself about his true nature. Wiping dirt from his face, the boy smiled fiercely, finally accepting this brutal reality. In his imagination, a scene of a grand battle under fiery skies emerged, where armies clashed in merciless slaughter. This place lived by a single law of the jungle: the strongest and cruelest survive. The young man's eye widened with excitement. Here he no longer needed to hide his monstrous predator nature. Ephemeral images of giant wolves majestically rose above the roofs of the ancient city, heralding the birth of a new beast. From now on, he could freely hunt in these merciless jungles, which everyone called Murim. Crunching his neck, covered in someone else's blood, he felt the intoxicating taste of absolute freedom. Stretching his bloodied hand toward the light, the young man declared this world an ideal place for true hunters. Under the glow of the cold moon, a majestic and dangerous new Murim unfolded before him. The young man sat unflinchingly in the bloody chamber, indifferently observing the consequences of his own slaughter. The cold gaze of his only open eye stopped on the corpse. Usually such weaklings were not worth attention, but now he needed to check something. The massive body of the defeated enemy lay motionless in a puddle of its own blood. Suddenly, a magical inventory interface flashed before the young man, illuminating the darkness with blue light. He thoughtfully touched his chin, instantly noticing radical changes in the system. In his past life, the inventory consisted of clear cells, where each item occupied one slot. Now it was a single, boundless space, resembling a vortex of pure energy. The blue portal softly pulsed in the air, completely obeying the will of its master. The young man reached out to the magical window, mentally estimating its colossal size at least 300 square meters. He leaned over the mangled corpse, deciding to practically test whether the old game mechanics worked here. With a disgusting crunch, he firmly grabbed the dead man right by the face. The enemy's body instantly began to disintegrate into digital pixels, obeying the system's algorithms. With a powerful jerk, the boy threw the remains directly into the glowing inventory portal. The huge corpse dissolved in a whirl of digital magic, leaving behind only a blood-red trail. The young man's eye widened with wild delight as he realized the convenience of instant evidence destruction. A new logical question arose in his mind. Could this space absorb living beings, and would they survive there? In the semi-darkness of the chamber stretched a creepy smile. Many more cruel experiments lay ahead. The next day, under a cloudless sky, The majestic pavilions of the sect rose calmly, hiding the true nature of this place. The young man obediently swept the yard while two senior students closely watched him. A contemptuous, predatory smile played on the face of one of the men. The boy froze with a broom in his hands, hiding his gaze and perfectly feigning complete submission. The sudden swing of the senior student's hand cut through the air with a whistle. A harsh blow to the back of the head made the boy jerk sharply. The attacker arrogantly asked if he had really gone completely numb. The youth instantly put on the mask of the local fool, let out a pitiful groan, and grinned crookedly. The man roughly jabbed his fist into his chest, ordering him to stop loafing around. He authoritatively pointed toward the stable where a saddled horse stood and ordered the animal to be taken for a walk. The boy hunched over, trembling with feigned fear, and made another senseless sound of obedience. The senior student grimaced with disgust, raging at the necessity of dealing with the dim-witted mute. Soon the youth was already leading the bay horse through the lively streets of the settlement. Around them, everyday life buzzed. Merchants bustled near the shops, and peasants went about their routine. In the noisy market, no one paid attention to the quiet groom. His eyes momentarily lost their foolish expression, filling with cold, dead calculation. Around the corner of one of the shops, a gang of local children lurked, clutching stones in their hands. Gloatingly laughing, they threw a cobblestone with all their might right into the groom's back. The stone painfully hit the boy in the nape, sharply throwing his head forward. His face hid in deep shadow, and a thin trickle of blood slowly crawled down his neck. The kids confidently stepped out of hiding, grimacing and cruelly mocking the mute fool. A sudden shock strike made their smiles instantly disappear. Around the youth, a terrifying demonic aura suddenly flared, and his figure turned into a threatening shadow. One of the boys sharply recoiled and cried, simply unable to withstand this devastating pressure of horror. But the very next moment, the youth gently stroked the horse again with the same silly smile, leaving the attacker completely embarrassed. He calmly continued on his way, as if this incident had never happened. The surprised boy could only blink in shock, not understanding whether it was real or just a hallucination. Local rumors stubbornly claimed that the groom was a pathetic idiot, incapable of any action. The young man confidently walked back to the residence, clearly planning his next move. Meanwhile, the senior apprentice sighed wearily, complaining that he had to clean the weapons by himself. He irritably approached the armory door, wondering where his partner could have disappeared to. Suddenly, a mute voice slipped out from there, causing the man to flinch in surprise and sternly ask what he was doing there. The elder's eye widened in absolute astonishment. Inside the room, all the blades and spears were perfectly cleaned and polished to a mere shine. The man realized in shock that this fool had done all the grunt work instead of him. The boy only obediently nodded, continuing to perfectly play the role of a brainless servant with a creepy smile. A thought flashed through the elder's mind that the mute worked extraordinarily fast, efficiently, and even without direct orders. He sincerely wondered if this scoundrel was finally starting to become a useful person. As a sign of recognition, the man took out a heavy pouch of coins, extending it to the servant. His gaze became cunning and appraising. Suddenly he laughed loudly and embraced the boy in a friendly manner, rejoicing that he had finally understood the harsh rules of survival. With a strong pat on the mute's back, he ordered him to keep up the good work. The man turned around contentedly, clutching his wallet, unaware of the changes behind him. From beneath the disheveled hair of the young man, absolutely icy, merciless predator's eyes were already looking at him. The boy mentally called him an idiot, who did not even realize that he had just paid for his own funeral. Under the blood-red sky of the evening city, the man confidently strode down the street, enjoying his dominance. He weighed the pouch in his hand, rejoicing at the unexpected wealth. A lustful grin appeared on his face as he decided to order the best courtesan today instead of the usual girl. The man confidently approached the luxurious brothel glowing with red lanterns and authoritatively threw money to the guard. Entering inside, he unequivocally ordered to call the incomparable Choson. The owner of the establishment bowed humbly, cautiously reminding that the guest usually chose another girl. The man arrogantly puffed out his chest, exhaling smoke, and unequivocally confirmed his new choice. The host's face twisted into a flattering smile of agreement. The client slammed a heavy wallet on the table, harshly cutting off any doubts about his solvency. He sprawled at the table in the cozy room, burning with lust and impatience. A gentle female voice was heard behind the door, asking for permission to enter. When the door opened, a luxurious woman in a semi-transparent outfit appeared before him, making him hold his breath with desire. Her beauty and grace were truly on a completely different, unattainable level. The man nervously swallowed and lustfully invited her to sit closer. The courtesan humbly knelt down and gracefully poured him some wine. He laughed loudly, completely losing his vigilance and demanding more drinks. The drunken guest began showering compliments on her tender hands, not noticing the deadly danger around. Darkness behind the wall thickened as he beckoned the girl closer to himself, and through a narrow crack in the wooden door behind him, a bloodshot eye was already watching intently. The young man's face in the darkness twisted into a demonic smile. The trap was perfectly shut, and the time of reckoning had come. Against the backdrop of a blood-red sky, a promise sounded to immediately bring the girl named Chosun to the room on the second floor. An unknown man stopped before the massive stairs leading to the red lantern-lit inn courtyard, Bongyan. From above, a fat man looked down on him arrogantly and with a sly smile. In his chubby hands was a heavy pouch completely filled with coins. The satisfied owner only smiled predatory, cynically noting that for him the main thing was profit. In the doorway against the hellish sunset appeared a terrifying silhouette of a guest, attracting the fat man's attention. The stranger silently stood with his back to the light, radiating a cold threat. The ominous figure entered inside, making the heavy steps on the floor. A burly guard instantly blocked his way, rudely asking the silent guest if he even understood where he had come. The face of the thug distorted with rage as he aggressively ordered the stranger to get lost. In response, the strange guest with disheveled hair and a wild look only extended a bag of money, uttering indistinct moaning. The owner of the establishment cautiously reached for the pouch, assessing the unexpected profit. Inside, dozens of copper coins dimly gleamed. The fat man's eye instantly widened with greedy delight. Changing his tone, he immediately offered the client to wait in another room, promising to quickly send the girl Eng to him. The owner's face spread into a broad, flattering smile as he hospitably invited the generous guest to come further. The mute visitor with bandaged arms slowly headed down the dark corridor of the inn yard. In the semi-darkness, the loose bandages on his arm hung threateningly, foreshadowing a bloody reprisal. Suddenly, the rough guard felt the fabric tighten like a dead knot around his neck, depriving him of the ability to breathe. The thug's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets from shock and suffocation. Desperately trying to free himself, he wheezed curses, trying to understand who had attacked him. His fingers vainly scratched the tight bandages as the air finally left his lungs. The mute killer, with inhuman strength, jerked the noose back, almost breaking the victim's neck. Shifting at his center of gravity, he brutally threw the huge opponent to the floor. The guard ran face first into the wooden boards at full speed. The killer firmly pinned the victim on his back, continuing to mercilessly squeeze the throat. The giant's body convulsively trembled in futile attempts to break free from the deadly grip. A wide, insane smile lit up the maniac's face, and his eyes flashed with blood-red light. He enjoyed every second of his victim's agony, radiating absolute psychopathic euphoria. In the darkness, his red pupils glowed with animalistic thirst for murder. After a brief struggle, the guard's body went limp, and the killer watched the work of his hands with predatory satisfaction. The young man heavily sank down next to the lifeless corpse, catching his breath. In the semi-darkness, his scarred face looked even more sinister against the background of the dead enemy. His gaze slid aside, cold-bloodedly assessing further actions. Wasting no time, the psychopath stood up and silently headed to the wooden wall. He stopped before a narrow crack, from behind which dim light was shining. His dark silhouette approached closely to the light source, carefully examining the hidden room. The bandaged hand calmly rested on the wooden partition. Suddenly, a blue holographic interface flashed before him with a system message about moving an object to the inventory. The young man mentally noted that previous training with the system had proven extremely useful. Examining his dagger, he realized that this ability would become a decisive advantage in his future hunts. In the rays of the blue system window, his eye gleamed coldly. The psychopath's suspicions were confirmed when a stats panel unfolded before him. Golden letters on the screen announced the gain of new experience for the committed murder. Sitting over the corpse, he finally understood the main rule of this world. Human life here is only a tool for leveling up. The young man realized that accumulating experience would inevitably lead to a level increase and rapid growth of strength. His eyes flared with madness again at the thought that each new murder would make the next hunt even easier. Spreading his arms in ecstasy, he reached a terrible conclusion. In this place, his power could become truly limitless. Feeling a surge of strength, the killer lifted the bandages, preparing for the next phase of his plan. His fingers skillfully tied a tight knot, while his gaze remained fixed on the dead body. Mimicking a camera lens with his fingers, he aimed at his victim. Through the formed frame, the pale, death-distorted face of the guard was clearly visible. In the maniac's thoughts flashed a cynical regret about the lack of a camera to capture this perfect moment. Meanwhile, in the corridor, the sword-armed guard continued to stand his watch. The silence was broken by the light footsteps of a girl hurrying to the required room. She leaned by the door, quietly inquiring whether the client was ready to receive her. The establishment's owner snapped at her in displeasure for being late, ordering her to serve the guest immediately despite his silence. Eng hurriedly opened the door, apologizing for the delay before the silhouette in the darkness. Left alone, the fat man only rolled his eyes irritably, waiting for the prophet. Later, his patience snapped, and he pressed against the wall, trying to eavesdrop on why no sounds came from the neighboring room. After coughing, he prepared to intervene in the suspicious silence. The master began loudly knocking on the door, calling for the guard Machil and the girl to come out, as the waiting time had expired. In response, no sound came from behind the closed door. The fat man flared up with rage, outraged that his subordinates dared to ignore him. He shouted fiercely at Machil, but his words were suddenly cut off by a piercing female scream. Pushing the door aside, the frightened owner burst inside, demanding explanations. His eyes instantly widened from paralyzing, incomprehensible horror. On the floor in the semi-darkness, the girl fainted, trembling from shock. Above her, the bare feet of a dead man eerily swung in the air. The body of the mighty guardian hung from the ceiling, suspended by the strong bandages of a mad mute guest. The vast plain, formed by the Hui and Yangtze rivers, always attracted people with its incredible wealth. However, where large sums of money accumulated, ruthless thieves and cruel bandits inevitably appeared. In response to the chaos of raiding attacks, numerous combat clans rose up, striving to restore order by force in the lands of Anhui. The most powerful among them was considered the majestic Namgung clan, which confidently held absolute supremacy in the Central Plains. It was somewhat surpassed by the Donri clan, but their fame firmly rested on the elite reconnaissance and elimination unit, the mysterious Black Raven Squad. Their skills in gathering shadow information were so impeccable that even the famous Beggars Guild recognized their unquestionable superiority. However, recently even these unparalleled trackers faced an extremely complicated case that cornered them. A subordinate silently entered the leader's office, respectfully bowing his head and handing over a secret scroll with a new report. The leader of the Black Raven Squad, Guy Dehyo, grimly examined the brought document, feeling growing inner anxiety. The man learned of yet another suicide, dryly stating that nearly 100 people had suddenly ended their lives in recent months. Such tragedies had happened before, but the current cases frightened experienced investigators with their absolute unnatural perfection. The commander's eyes narrowed suspiciously, for despite all the available evidence, he categorically refused to believe in such an absurd coincidence of circumstances. Analyzing the bloody chain of deaths, the investigator found out that the very first victim was a craftsman of the clan arsenal named Machil. Hearing that the deceased belonged to their own Danri clan, Dehyo tensed, feeling a personal interest in this investigation. Thoughtfully stroking his beard, the leader ordered his subordinate to immediately clarify the exact place where the master's body was found. The scout instantly reported that the fatal tragedy unfolded within the walls of the famous local tavern, Phoenix. The commander harshly gave the order to go there, flatly rejecting the subordinates' pleas to stay safe in their own residence. His gaze radiated unwavering determination, for he simply had to see such a bizarre case with his own eyes. Soon the elite squad arrived at the noisy inn, which majestically towered against the clear sky, reliably hiding its gruesome secrets. The investigators silently stopped before the closed door of the room, preparing to thoroughly examine the place of the craftsman's death. The assistant quietly confirmed that it was here they found the dead Ma Chil, hanged on massive ceiling beams. Dehyo's face contorted with tension as he aloud suggested that this dubious wave of suicides was actually a series of carefully planned murders. Examining the solid wooden walls, the commander tried to logically comprehend how exactly the invisible criminal could have stealthily entered inside. The subordinate assured that he personally searched every dark corner, and the killer physically could not have passed through the locked door unnoticed. The leader sharply placed his hand on the wooden partition, assuming that the only alternative path could be this fragile joint. His extremely vigilant gaze stopped at a barely noticeable narrow crack between the thick boards. The man confidently noted that if these panels were carefully removed, the criminal could freely move between adjacent rooms. However, thick dust and a complete absence of fresh traces on the wood indicated that these boards had never been moved in their life. The assistant finally dispelled the commander's doubts, explaining that the panels were mortared firmly into the ceiling and the floor, making dismantling impossible. Dekio clenched his fists painfully, again returning to the obsessive thought of whether this was truly an ordinary banal suicide. Suddenly, the subordinate remembered a critically important detail, recounting that at that fatal time there was another mysterious guest in the neighboring room. The investigator's eyes flashed dangerously when he learned that the deceased's mysterious neighbor was a young man named Sosum from the Donri clan. Meanwhile, Sosum himself, leisurely leading his horse by the bridle, calmly walked through the noisy streets of the remote settlement. Before his eyes shone a semi-transparent system interface, which detailed the mysterious characteristics and available combat skills. The young man frowned heavily, analyzing past events and finally convincing himself that his recent target definitely possessed martial arts. He tightly gripped the leather straps of his equipment, well aware of the main rule of the system. Killing a stronger opponent always brings much more experience. However, Sosum soberly assessed his own strength, clearly realizing that right now, he would easily lose even to the weakest warrior of his native clan. He desperately needed transitional loot. And at that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by a mocking shout from a local thug who decided to pick on a familiar victim. A group of grim street bandits brazenly blocked the young man's path, looking at him with open, predatory contempt. Armed with crude clubs and knives, they happily prepared for an easy, unpunished amusement. Sosum cast a cold, completely indifferent glance at them, instantly recognizing the attackers as ordinary street rats. His horse snorted anxiously, sensing the aggression, although the bandits did not even suspect who this supposed loser from a powerful clan really was. The leader of the wrongdoers grinned with a disgusting smile, openly enjoying the upcoming merciless torment of the defenseless youth. Angered by the silent ignoring, one of the impatient bandits incredibly rudely grabbed Sosum by the shoulder. Leaning over the boy, the huge thug hissed ominously about the urgent need for a private, painful conversation. Offering no resistance, Sosum calmly allowed himself to be dragged along with his faithful horse into a dark, dead-end alley. From beneath his thick hair flashed his icy gaze as he mentally calculated whether he could kill them all and skillfully disguise the slaughter as a mass suicide. The young man planned to quickly hide the corpses in the bottomless system inventory, but he was afraid that the slightest noise would attract unnecessary attention from the city guard. The bandits had already aggressively surrounded him in a tight circle, clenching their fists firmly for a brutal, bloody beating. Brazenly mocking the victim's appearance, one of the attackers delivered an extremely sharp, sweeping blow. Suddenly, from the dense darkness came a commanding order to stop immediately, and another terrifying figure leisurely stepped out to the group. The horrified bandit instantly recoiled, trembling before the unquestionable authority of the arriving Janho, whose name echoed in Sosum's cold calculations. Janho approached the young man's horse with incredible greedy admiration, completely ignoring everything happening around. He brusquely petted the animal, thinking aloud that this wonderful steed would make the perfect gift for their insane boss. Mockingly glancing at Sosum, the new dangerous enemy, with a crooked smile, asked his opinion about this brilliant idea. Janho's face twisted disgustingly into a sadistic, bloodthirsty grimace that left no doubt about his true intentions. Sosum's red eye fiercely flared in the darkness, for he was finally convinced. The enemy's plan from the very beginning was a merciless murder for the sake of the horse. The bandit confidently declared that the young man was overthinking, not even suspecting that he had chosen a deadly dangerous target for his hunt. In response to direct threats, Sosum coldly suggested simply killing him without any unnecessary pathetic talks. Jono literally went mad from such unheard-of audacity, wildly staring at the silent fool who suddenly dared to open his mouth. At that very moment, Sosum swiftly activated his spatial inventory, summoning a dazzling neon glow in the middle of the night darkness. From the sparkling energy vortex instantly appeared a shining blade, causing the shocked attacker to scream wildly from animal terror. A powerful flash of light tore through the alley's gloom as an invisible destructive force made its deadly cut. The bandit's eyes instantly glazed over from absolute incomprehension, while his pitiful consciousness faded forever. The sharp blade mercilessly pierced the enemy's flesh, accompanied by a copious fountain of bright red blood. The rest of the street thugs froze in deep, paralyzing shock, watching their mighty leader fall heavily dead. A destructive violet-pink explosion of pure energy wiped out everything in its path, confirming the colossal destructive power of the unexpected strike. Amid the sharp clinking of illusory chains before the ruthless youth's eyes appeared a system message about the long-awaited level-up. The dark silhouette of Sosum was swiftly enveloped by a dense, blood-red aura of unrestrained rage in primal, terrifying power. One of the pitiful surviving bandits screamed wildly in panic, tearfully begging the others to immediately flee from this incarnate demon. But from the dense darkness, where eerie crimson eyes burned predatory, came a desperate, doomed order to destroy the cursed monster at any cost. The man's face distorted with animal terror as a frantic scream burst from his open throat. His mind refused to believe in the reality of the horror that was inevitably approaching. The bald mercenary dashed away at full speed through the dark alley, barely tripping over scattered barrels. Desperately moving his legs, he tried to break free from the deadly trap. Only one panicked thought beat in his head about the true nature of the terrifying monster behind him. The ominous dark aura rapidly approached, like a living shadow engulfing the remnants of light in the narrow corridor. A pitiful plea for salvation escaped his lips as he felt the cold breath of death. A devastating blow instantly knocked the fugitive to the ground, splattering blood on the stone masonry. The man fell heavily onto the dirty ground, emitting a muffled groan of unbearable pain. Cowering in horror, he desperately realized that his miserable life would truly end in this doorway. His trembling hand instinctively reached for the exit from the alley in a futile attempt to grasp life. But the impenetrable darkness finally enveloped his consciousness, destroying any hope of escape. A huge shadow of a demon loomed over the fallen enemy, reminding that earlier he considered the hero only a defenseless source of money. Consciousness was pierced by the memory of how these bandits laughed cruelly, beating their victim for profit. A destructive burst of energy descended on the mercenary, who pitifully justified his habit of making easy money. The young man cold-bloodedly dragged the lifeless body across the ground, leaving a bloody trail behind. In the last moments of life, the bandit only managed to mentally curse himself for dying at the hands of the one he considered weak. Dead silence enveloped the place of execution, where the hero silently sat by the bodies of his offenders. An unexpected hoarse groan tore through the darkness. One of the attackers was still breathing. The bald bandit suddenly opened his eyes and screamed from sharp fright. The young man calmly noted the enemy's awakening, who in panic called him a true demon. The bound prisoner pitifully stared at his executioner, nervously swallowing saliva from the feeling of his own helplessness. The cold blade of the knife, with a quiet whistle, lay right on the trembling mercenary's throat. The hero, with icy calm in his eyes, inquired the name of the first killed insolent. He pressed the blade more firmly, forcing the captive to recall the words of the dead Chan-ho about the mysterious organization. Drenched in cold sweat, the bandit screamed wildly that it was the Black Society. Before his eyes appeared a powerful shadow sect that cruelly controlled all the backstreets of Bonyan, and in which Chan-ho was an influential leader. The hero thoughtfully absorbed this information, not lowering the deadly metal from the enemy's neck. Details instantly surfaced in his memory, confirming that the dead leader had indeed boasted about his boss. The captive hysterically blurted out the name of the leader Panpoyoma, who had ordered the youth's murder for stealing a horse. In the hero's mind, the puzzle of the criminal hierarchy of this world clearly formed, resembling ruthless criminal syndicates. The youth barely smiled and nodded approvingly. He coldly ordered all information about the sects to be laid out, promising to spare the captive's life in exchange for valuable data. The realization of an unexpected chance for salvation flashed like lightning in the mercenary's inflamed brain. His battered face spread into a grotesque smile of distrust and mad hope. But already the next moment, the bandit's eyes rolled back. A merciless blade movement cut his throat. The hero reached out his hand to the face of the corpse, activating the inventory system to collect lawful loot. Exhaling a cloud of steam, the young man wearily confirmed that no living enemies remained. His gaze slid along the dark alley, stopping at the faithful horse, calmly waiting ahead. Exhausted from the heavy battle and the tension endured, the hero heavily sank to the cold ground. Analyzing the night's events, he mentally noted the extraordinary value of the knowledge gained. The name of the criminal sect was firmly and forever engraved in his memory. In his imagination appeared crowds of enemies, perfect cannon fodder, surpassing ordinary people but inferior to true masters. The young man cold-bloodedly decided that from now on, these bandits would become his main targets for systematic hunting. Suddenly, a bright message about another level up flashed before his eyes. He raised his palms in amazement, observing the incredible changes in his own body. The system instantly healed him, causing not only fresh wounds but all old scars to disappear. A predatory spark of absolute satisfaction with his new abilities flared in the hero's eyes. A bold analytical assumption arose in his mind. Could this regeneration restore critical damage to the heart or brain? The young man resolutely clenched his fist, realizing that just before leveling up, he could afford deadly risks in battle. However, his attention was immediately drawn to one significant and dangerous drawback. The dazzling flash of aura during level up was too noticeable and could easily expose his position to stronger enemies. Rising to his feet, the young man silently headed towards the exit of the bloody alley. He clearly understood, to survive among predators, a hunter must learn to look absolutely mediocre. The hero calmly stepped onto the snowy street, blending in with dozens of ordinary passers-by. The best camouflage is to become an indistinguishable cog in the endless urban crowd. Suppressing his own explosive aura in the epicenter of the human flow, he became an invisible threat. Only this way could one become a perfect hunter who strikes from the shadows. The young man set an iron rule for himself: to level up only after killing a victim and in the absence of witnesses. His measured steps brought him closer to the illuminated and noisy districts of the old city. With a confident movement, he grabbed the leather reins of his faithful horse. The light of the night lanterns caught his silhouette from the darkness, slowly leaving the danger zone. In his thoughts, the hero admitted that if Chan-ho had been even a little stronger, the battle could have been the last. He led the horse down a narrow street towards the noisy city life. The image of the mute fool could no longer serve as reliable camouflage in a world full of ruthless killers. The young man finally immersed himself in the whirl of the night market, where death could be hiding behind every face. A critical need was ripening to increase strength as quickly as possible and without unnecessary publicity. Calmly making his way through the crowd of merchants, he formulated a cruel plan of action in his head. The only way to the top of the food chain was the relentless destruction of increasingly stronger monsters. This simple, bloody truth became his main strategy on the path to absolute power. Suddenly, he sharply turned over his shoulder, casting a piercing red glance into the darkness. A stern stranger blocked his way with a question that smelled of blood. Was the young man really the one who cruelly killed a Meshkul? The system window suddenly illuminated the space with cold blue light, signaling a critical error. The game system warned of a malfunction, but informed that the process would continue without obstacles. The young man sat alone on the straw in the dimly lit stable, intently staring at the holographic panel. His tired eyes carefully read every line of the abnormal warning. The darkness around seemed to thicken, leaving the boy alone with the unknown of the digital world. He remembered the noisy streets of the estate, clearly realizing that his existence here was a violation of the game laws. The young man tensed, lightly touching his lips in deep thought. However, despite the absurdity of the situation, the world around continued to function. Sitting on the cold floor, he again shifted his gaze to the bright screen before him. The boy concluded that his very presence in this reality was the system error itself. He dismissed doubts, deciding not to waste precious time on empty reflections. With a decisive movement, the young man pressed the screen, accepting the current conditions. An expanded second-level player status panel instantly unfolded before him. His eyes widened in surprise at the unexpected changes in the interface. Characteristic indicators, previously hidden behind question marks, were now displayed as clear scales. The boy assumed this was also a result of a glitch, since reality could not be precisely digitized. He confidently selected the Combat Skills tab. The stable space flashed again as the system displayed a long list of available abilities. His gaze quickly ran through the basic techniques: chop, stab, block, and throw. He easily recognized these standard passive skills typical for character creation. But one particular ability made him freeze. The youth bit his lip gloomily, trying to recall any information about it. The spiritual eye technique was completely unfamiliar to him. A mystical blue symbol flashed in the boy's eye as he realized the system had provided no description of the skill. The silence was suddenly cut by a series of sharp system sounds. A notification appeared on the screen about the fulfillment of conditions and the automatic activation of the spiritual eye. Right before his eyes emerged a massive number 20. The boy's pupils narrowed in horror. The window warned of an approaching enemy, at least 10 levels higher. The countdown mercilessly decreased to 19 and 18 meters, 17 meters to the unknown threat. The young man instantly realized that the new skill worked like an early warning radar. 16 meters. He stared tensely at the message, feeling cold sweat on his temples. The distance rapidly melted away, 15, 14. Heavy, confident footsteps were heard outside. 13 meters. The boy froze, not taking his eyes off the crack beneath the massive stable doors. 12 meters. He clenched his fist until it cracked, trying to control his own body. The young man slowly stood up, tensing every muscle. 11 meters. Half covering his face with his palm, he logically reasoned that this was hardly a real enemy. The estate remained absolutely quiet and calm under the cover of night. Few would dare an open invasion of the Dronzer family, and true killers would act faster. 9 meters. The hero concluded that a powerful master from the clan itself was approaching. He recalled how much effort it took to reach the second level, realizing the chasm of 10 ranks. To achieve such a result on ordinary people, thousands of bloody sacrifices would be needed. Through the walls, the heavy, destructive aura of the guest was already felt. 5 meters. 4 meters. The counter dropped to 3, and the young man mentally named the visitor. The door suddenly burst open, letting in dazzling light in the dark silhouettes of 2 men. At the threshold stood a stern, mustached squad commander with a piercing gaze. The young man's pupils narrowed from paralyzing fear. The master approached the frightened boy closely, towering over him. The warrior roughly grabbed the hero by the collar of his tattered clothes. The boy shuddered, unable to look away from the commander's harsh face. The man coldly asked if he was the one who killed Mashul. The young man's face twisted with genuine shock. The master carelessly pushed the suspect away, causing him to whimper plaintively. A dangerous blue energy flared in the warrior's eyes. With a lightning-fast movement, he released a destructive stream of true chi that pierced the boy's body. The energy mercilessly plunged into the core of the Dantian, searching for the slightest traces of martial arts. The inspection showed absolute emptiness inside the vessel. Satisfied with the absence of power, the commander retreated backward. The boy exhaled in shock, recovering from the violent scanning. The master sighed in disappointment, resigned to the false trail. He sharply turned around, ordering his men to leave. The youth lightly touched his lips, hiding the trembling and true emotions. The commander's subordinate asked the order in surprise, not expecting such an outcome. Left alone, the boy heavily leaned against the wooden wall. The darkness of the stable concealed his face as a predatory smile played on his lips. In the impenetrable darkness, his eyes flashed with a bloody red light. Outside, the assistant asked indignantly why they had left the suspect without interrogation. The commander calmly replied that he indeed suspected this beggar. That is why he infused his own chi into the man's body, to find even a grain of inner strength. But the scan results proved that the boy was an ordinary, weak person. However, serious doubts continued to swarm in the mind of the experienced warrior. Looking at the full moon, he wondered if all those people had really committed suicide. That night, the bloody epidemic in Bongyan suddenly came to an end. However, instead of peace, clouds thickened over the city, foretelling a new wave of deaths. The pouring rain mercilessly flooded the streets, washing away the traces of the upcoming massacre. The only source of light remained the old tavern, where the storm had driven the local warriors. Suddenly, one of the visitors slammed his fist on the wooden table. Silence paralyzed the hall for a moment, making everyone present tense. A drunken man roughly wiped his mouth with his sleeve, preparing to tell a sensation. He loudly asked his interlocutor if he had heard about the nameless hero. His companion confirmed that there was no one left in the city who did not know this name. The drunkard corrected his friend, pompously declaring that the avenger should be addressed exclusively as Lord. He burst out laughing, telling how this warrior is mass slaughtering scoundrels from unorthodox factions. The frightened interlocutor tried to calm him down, looking around, but the man just waved him off, shouting loudly that the White Tiger and Red Wolf clans have already been exterminated. The companion put a finger to his lips, horrified, reminding about the existence of the ruthless Black Society. The drunkard aggressively waved his hand, convinced that the Lord will soon crush these bastards too. Suddenly, the gaze of those present was drawn to the open doors of the tavern. A figure wrapped in a black cloak silently stepped into the doorway. The stranger adjusted his bamboo hat with a bandaged hand, hiding his face in the shadow. His heavy footsteps echoed under the downpour on the wet cobblestones. A flash of lightning epically illuminated his grim silhouette near the old beggar against the backdrop of massive gates. In the pouring rain, the guard fought sleep alone near the closed gates. Fatigue finally broke him, making him sweetly doze right at his post. A sudden hard blow to the head instantly knocked out the remnants of sleep. The partner fiercely scolded him for negligence at such a tense time. He nervously reminded about the chaos currently being sown by the nameless righteous swordsman. According to him, this mysterious enemy had already brutally destroyed 3 of their units. The guard's face contorted with animal fear for the fate of the clan. Anger and panic mixed, forcing him to grit his teeth. His pitiful tirade was suddenly interrupted by a stream of fresh blood. The severed head of the partner thudded dully onto the wet cobblestones. The surviving guard realized with icy horror that the killer was right in front of him. In a moment, his own head was already rolling down the blood-stained stairs. From beneath the wet hat flashed the empty gaze of the merciless reaper. A dark figure slowly opened the massive gates towards the storm. The rain mercilessly poured over the emptied courtyard, washing away the traces of the massacre. The warrior silently stepped onto enemy territory. From the darkness, a hail of sharp arrows suddenly flew at him. He barely flinched, sensing the approach of danger. Behind the gates, a whole army of armed mercenaries was already waiting for him. He cold-bloodedly stopped before the enraged crowd. From the crowd came a contemptuous curse directed at the audacious rat. The air electrified with tension before the inevitable slaughter. Dozens of guards tenazed their weapons, ready to tear apart the lone enemy. The warrior stood motionless before the army, radiating absolute calm. A bright flash of lightning tore through the night sky. With a loud battle cry, the mercenaries charged into the attack. The fighter's hand clenched the sword hilt tightly. Raindrops seemed to freeze in the air before the massacre began. A blood-red aura exploded from the blade, distorting the space. The technique of 1,000 swords mercilessly sliced through the first rows of attackers. The faces of the enemies twisted with paralyzing fear. The warrior transformed into a deadly whirlwind. His blade tore flesh, leaving behind only a bloody mess. Mercenaries gripped by panic shouted to retreat under the pressure of energy. One of the daredevils risked attacking head-on, promising to kill the monster. The swordsman swiftly dodged the spear's trajectory. His lightning-infused strike pierced through 2 opponents at once. In the dying man's eyes froze a mute, inevitable shock. The bloodless body fell limply onto the rain-soaked ground. The remnants of the enemies shuddered at the cruelty of the execution. Another mercenary grinned sinisterly, delivering a treacherous blow to the back. The warrior's eye flashed with a demonic red glow. He blocked the deadly blade with his bare hands. The enemy screamed madly about victory, but his triumph was interrupted by a blue flash. The hero instantly activated the spatial inventory, drawing a magical weapon. The attacker's head was literally blown to bloody pieces. Surprise at the sudden appearance of the dagger froze in the air. The face splattered with someone else's blood remained deathly calm. The next blow mercilessly finished off another guard. The armed enemy jumped back, desperately keeping distance. The mercenary laughed hysterically, realizing he had managed to wound the opponent. He mockingly admitted that he had considered the swordsman an invulnerable monster. But it turned out that before them was only a man who was also bleeding, an ordinary man who could easily be killed. The surviving fighters cheered up, their eyes ignited with predatory excitement. The hero calmly bandaged the torn wound on his side. His tattered bamboo hat fell dully into the puddle. A grim smile spread across the warrior's face, and his eyes flashed with dazzling light. The night storm over the residence continued to rage with renewed force. The last surviving guard panicked and hid behind the stones near the ruined hut. He fiercely cursed his fate as cannon fodder in this slaughter. Trembling with horror, the man clenched his teeth and forced himself to fight. He relied on the knowledge of the secret path. This trail led straight to the main estate on the mountain. There, where their undisputed leader was hiding. Cornered, the mercenary decided to fight for his life to the last. He commanded the archers in the ambush, rejoicing in the tactical advantage in the darkness. The dark silhouette of the Reaper slowly but inevitably approached them. Nyman in hysteria gave the order. "I've ordered to open fire." A deadly rain of arrows fell precisely on the target. The guard timidly peeked out from the hiding place, hoping to see a dead body. With a deafening crack, the destructive wave shattered the wooden shelter to pieces. The bodies of the archers were torn to pieces in a bloody fountain. The last survivor froze, paralyzed by primal animal fear. He muttered pitifully, unable to take a single step. The warrior approached the remains of the ambush, coldly inquiring if everyone was already dead. The guard asked in a trembling voice if the one before him was truly the righteous swordsman. He desperately begged to be told why they deserved such a cruel punishment. From beneath dark hair, a blazing red eye looked at him. To the cry of despair, The hero responded with a swift strike, cutting off the supplicant's head. He indifferently noted that he only needed their lives. The decapitated corpses remained bleeding near the gates. The thunderclap of lightning illuminated the path to the clan's main estate. The blood-soaked warrior focused his gaze on his last target, the leader of Bangpoyomi. It all started with the White Tiger unit. Having gained a new level after killing Jangho, he was still too weak for an open confrontation with the Black faction. Therefore, the young man chose the shadow tactic. He lured enemies one by one and mercilessly destroyed them from ambush. Arson became his favorite tool to start the hunt, and by the time the unit leader raised the alarm, it was already too late. More than half of the White Tiger fighters were already lying dead in pools of their own blood. During this bloody purge, something unexpected happened. The locals and officials, impressed by his cruelty to enemies, nicknamed him the Nameless Righteous Swordsman. Having gained this new mask and reputation, it became much easier for him to eradicate the remnants of the unofficial faction. The final blow was the murder of the unit's very leader, which brought the hero to level 5. Along with the promotion, he unlocked active skills for the first time. The system granted him the Qigong body easing technique and the powerful Three Forces sword art. The young man's face under the hat's brim twisted into a predatory smile. Now he was ready to face the top of the Black faction face to face. Throughout Bongyan, only one criminal group remained, the infamous Black Society. While children played heroes on the streets, the Red Wolf Gate was forever wiped off the face of the earth. Cold rain continuously poured over the roof of the last enemy's residence. An old man sat alone on the veranda watching the downpour. On his back, an ominous embroidery of 2 intertwined cobras gleamed. The old man's face was furrowed with deep wrinkles, but his gaze remained sharp and dangerous. This was Bang Poyom, the ruthless leader of the Black Society. The temple courtyard was drowned in darkness and the noise of the storm. A bright flash of lightning illuminated the figure of the hero, who silently stood before the leader of the enemies. The old man glanced at the uninvited guest and asked if he was really the same righteous swordsman. The young man did not utter a word under the pouring rain. Bang Poyom mockingly inquired why the fighter for justice hid his face beneath thick fabrics. From beneath the wet strands of hair came a cold reply. He had never been righteous. The old man's eye narrowed suspiciously, not understanding why then the boy so persistently exterminated criminal factions. A mad, bloodthirsty smile blossomed on the hero's face, completely negating any hints of nobility. The leader of the Black Society froze for a moment, realizing what he had heard. And already the next second, the old man burst out laughing, covering his face with his hand, and admitted that the youth had managed to deceive everyone around. The hero decisively drew his blade and objected. People simply believed in what they wanted to believe. With a dull clatter, the scabbards fell onto the wooden floor, and the old man only acknowledged his opponent as extremely interesting. Drawing his own sword, which emitted a faint blue glow, Bang Poyom declared that he would not regret it, even if today he set off to the river of the dead. His eyes flashed with a demonic yellow light, and he roared, challenging the enemy to show all his strength. The elder was the first to rush into the attack, cutting through the rain curtain with a powerful strike from above. 2 blades clashed with incredible force, illuminating the courtyard with a dazzling explosion of blue and red aura. The youth's eye filled with a bloody gleam from the colossal tension. Bang Poyom, resembling a true demon, pressed with his strength, sparking showers of sparks from the opponent's weapon. The defense was broken, and the sharp metal cut the hero's hand, releasing a fountain of blood. The experienced leader immediately noticed an open zone for the next strike. The youth tried to close the distance, mentally assessing that the enemy's blade should not reach him. But he was wrong. A new bloody flash marked a deep wound in the shoulder. The next devastating swing tore open the youth's back. The hero fell heavily onto the stone pavement, leaving a bloody trail behind. His body was pierced by pain, and the bleeding from the wound did not stop. The elder grinned with satisfaction, finally convinced that his enemy's physical condition was far from perfect. Gathering the last of his strength, the young man made a quick dash toward the danger. However, his attack was instantly repelled by the elder's dazzling block. Bang Poyom immediately went on the counterattack, unleashing a barrage of merciless strikes on the boy. The hero's mind worked feverishly. The enemy deliberately struck only at open wounds, increasing blood loss. Delivering another blow, the leader mockingly asked what the boy was thinking one step away from death. The young man gritted his teeth, making the difficult decision to sacrifice his own flesh for a chance at victory. He clearly understood that continuing the fight at this pace would inevitably lead to his death. Accumulating the last of his mana, the hero activated the sword art of three powers. Suddenly, the elder's straight blade split into segments and, like a whip, sharply struck the boy's body. Startled, the young man froze, staring in shock at the amazing whip sword. Bang Poyom's yellow eyes shone with triumph. The enemy had fallen into a trap. He smugly noted the absolute effectiveness of his hidden trump card. The elder mockingly emphasized that his opponent had encountered such a flexible weapon for the first time in his life. The young man stood with his head lowered, bleeding and showing no signs of resistance. But already the next moment, the old leader's eyes widened with animal terror. The hero instantly vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a blurred silhouette. The boy's leg pushed off the water puddle with incredible speed. The activated Qigong technique transformed him into a true lightning bolt, releasing a colossal arc cut. A terrible explosion of energy tore through the yard, raising clouds of water and debris into the air. Thick smoke covered the battlefield, hiding the results of the desperate strike. When the dust cleared, the boy was horrified. Black segments of the enemy's whip coiled around him, completely blocking any retreat. Behind the elder appeared a giant aura in the form of a ghostly cobra. Bang Poyom slowly stepped forward, acknowledging the boy's style as extremely strange due to his willingness to use his own body as bait. Unfolding the rings of the blue aura, the leader declared that this is not the path of an honest warrior, but of a treacherous killer or hunter. The hero stood under the merciless rain, feeling immense fatigue. The old man's predatory smile grew even wider with the anticipation of the imminent resolution. He tore off his outer garment, revealing a sturdy chainmail, and explained that in a deadly duel, the one who survives is the one with the most hidden trump cards. Spreading his arms to the sides, the old man proclaimed his superiority and called the young man's lack of secret techniques his fatal mistake. A gigantic energy serpent rose above the battlefield, ready to crush the enemy without a single chance of escape. The young man, with his last strength, crossed his blade with the black whip, desperately repelling the assault. Bang Poyom gave his last order, to die right now. With his jaws wide open, the blue cobra lunged at the hero while the old man, in ecstasy, cursed this nameless demon killer. The gigantic, semi-transparent blue snake roared forward, tearing through space. The enemy shouted fiercely that it was time to die for the nameless demon killer. The hero dodged lightning fast, and the massive head of the phantom snake crashed into the ground with a rumble, raising a thick cloud of dust. The opponent confidently declared that any resistance is now absolutely futile. The snake's tail cut through the dust cloud at a furious speed, trying to knock down everything in its path. The old man snarled fiercely, rejoicing that he was finally cornering this scoundrel. Suddenly, his terrifying yellow eye widened as he realized his fatal mistake. Instead of the real enemy, his strike split in half one of the members of the Black Society. Realizing he had attacked a mere decoy, the old man desperately began looking around for the true opponent. The hero flew down like a stone, tightly gripping the sword in his hands, its blade flashing brightly in the darkness. He instantly activated the second form of the deadly Three Forces sword technique. The powerful vertical swing left a dazzling white trail behind, tearing through the night darkness. Delivering a piercing strike to the very core, the swordsman left the enemy no chance to evade. The sharp blade cracked through the old man's palm, splashing thick crimson blood in all directions. From unbearable pain, the enemy screamed wildly, bearing sharp, beast-like teeth. The hero mentally marveled how the old man managed in the last millisecond to put out his hand to save his heart from being pierced. The opponent, maddened by pain and rage, roared that this battle was far from over. Under the cold downpour, he swiftly jumped back, swinging his deadly chain whip. The swordsman skillfully deflected the flying blades, sparking bright sparks from the clash of metal. With burning eyes, the hero rushed in pursuit, decisively cutting off all paths of retreat. Right in the middle of the fierce battle, the young man sharply activated his spatial inventory. Out of nowhere, the dead began to fly out, confusing the old man and making him scream in bewilderment. The bodies whirled in a gruesome vortex, creating a bloody shield against the chain strikes. The old man fell heavily to his knees under the pouring rain, gasping convulsively for air. Pressing the bloodied wound on his chest, he shockingly pondered how the corpses could have appeared out of thin air. A terrible thought flashed through his mind about whether this monster still had any hidden trump cards. The rain continued to relentlessly pour over the courtyard of the residence, which was now completely strewn with mutilated bodies. From the darkness of the forest came only the eerie sounds of rain and the moans of the dying. The opponent clenched his teeth until they creaked, filled with powerless rage and a desire for revenge. He sprang from his place, shouting curses and feverishly searching for the missing rat. The old man continued to scream wildly, calling the opponent an absolute psychopath for using corpses in battle. Suddenly, from the darkness, a black projectile whistled straight at him. The enemy barely managed to block the unexpected attack with the hilt of his sword, painfully groaning from the incredible force of the blow. With a wild gleam in his dilated pupils, he demanded an immediate stop to these dirty tricks. Swinging his whip, the old man blindly tried to clear the space around him. Cold sweat appeared on his face as he began to realize his hopeless situation in this trap. In his inflamed imagination, a giant image of a bloodthirsty wolf appeared, making him doubt whether he was now the real prey. The great master Bang Poyom looked up with absolute horror, refusing to believe that he himself had become the victim. Meanwhile, the dark shadow of the hero flashed towards him from under the roof like a ghost. The youth with terrifyingly blazing eyes cried out fiercely, rejoicing that he had finally driven his target. He made a devastating sweep, cutting raindrops in the air in half. The old man froze, stunned to realize that it was just another illusion. The real blade mercilessly plunged into his back, spraying a huge fountain of blood. The blade pierced through the chest cavity, tearing flesh and bones with incredible cruelty. A dark figure with a burning eye stood motionless over the pierced enemy, radiating an aura of pure death. The old man's bloodied hands convulsively and futilely tried to pull the foreign sword from his torn chest. Spitting out clots of blood, he croaked that the youth had indeed managed to destroy the entire black society. The old man fell powerless to his knees and with his last breath asked what was the purpose of this massacre at all. The swordsman coldly cut off that he needed no reason for this. The enemy's face was finally distorted by the death shock and complete, absolute despair. The hero added in an icy tone that people have always killed each other since the very beginning of time. From the times of primitive savages to modern civilization, humanity has never ceased senseless bloodshed. The shadow of the killer loomed over the victim with the cruel truth that the strong always rob and trample the weak. Leaning close to the enemy's face, he whispered that this time the role of the strong simply fell to him. The old man's eye glazed over, forever losing the remnants of life under the merciless rain. At that very moment, a dazzling pillar of energy burst into the night sky above the estate, marking the end of the battle. The hero slowly walked away down the dark alley, leaving behind only ruins and death. He calmly wiped his bloodied sword on the sleeve of his cloak with a single precise movement. The awareness of his own power filled him as the last drops of blood dripped from the sharp blade onto the ground. With cold calm, the young man concluded that with the destruction of the enemies, his long preparations were finally complete. Now was the perfect time to move on to the next decisive stage of the plan. Lightning split the heavens, emphasizing his thought about a world where the strong become even stronger, and hunting prey is much harder. The hero's face twisted into a grim smile and his eyes flashed with a predatory, uncontrollable excitement. He mentally challenged Murim himself, preparing to conquer this ruthless world of martial arts. A powerful thunderstorm raged over the impregnable mountain peaks, heralding a new bloody era. In the valley stood the majestic fortress of the sect, completely enveloped in a red, ominous glow. Inside the spacious hall, dozens of loyal followers lined up in neat rows, awaiting instructions. On the massive throne stood the mysterious figure of the leader, whose face was hidden in thick shadows. The ruler asked in a calm tone how much time remained until the inevitable war between the light and the dark. His dark silhouette radiated absolute, unwavering power and strategic patience. The servant respectfully bowed to the floor and reported that exactly 2 years remained until the beginning. The leader thoughtfully repeated this number, deciding that it was time to slowly launch the grand plan into action. The subordinate bowed low and without hesitation confirmed his absolute obedience to the will of the master. The hall was again enveloped in a heavy, oppressive silence, emphasizing the scale of the impending threat. On the error system before the eyes flashed a stern order to immediately execute the first stratagem. The devoted servant once again unequivocally confirmed that the order would be executed flawlessly and without any delay. A powerful flash of green lightning tore through the space, shattering stones and leaving a destructive trail behind. Sunlight flooded the bustling streets of the lively city. The dark-haired young man leisurely led the horse through the dense crowd, remaining unnoticed. In the local tavern, 3 men were actively discussing the latest news. One of them joyfully announced that the nameless swordsman had finally wiped out the local gang, causing a sensation among the merchants. His interlocutor grinned widely, suggesting from now on to call the savior the righteous swordsman. However, the third man, crossing his arms over his chest, gloomily expressed doubt about the general celebration. His companions slammed the table indignantly, demanding not to forget all the former atrocities of the bandits. The man's face twisted with anger as he growled that even tearing those scoundrels apart alive would be too little a punishment. The skeptic calmly endured this emotional outburst, acknowledging its correctness. He bitterly added that neither corrupt officials nor the so-called righteous factions ever cared about ordinary people. In his eyes flashed sincere gratitude when he admitted that only the nameless swordsman dared to stand in their defense. The man with a toothpick in his mouth thoughtfully lowered his gaze, digesting the harsh truth. A heavy sigh of weariness from the world's injustice escaped his chest. Agreement prevailed at the table that without the hero's intervention, they would have remained defenseless. The interlocutors silently finished their wine, pondering the consequences of the battle. Suddenly, one of the visitors jumped to his feet, wildly shouting praise to the savior who drove out the dark faction. The crowd picked up the joyful cry, glorifying the victory over the criminals. The tavern exploded with euphoria of triumph and long-awaited freedom. While the streets drowned in joy, the young man silently led his horse away from the noise. His face remained stone cold as he mentally decided to leave this place forever. Under the cover of night, the majestic residence of the Dronzer clan towered over the city, lit by dim lanterns. The young man stopped in the inner courtyard of the estate, hiding in the shadow beside his horse. Suddenly, a system message about the approaching enemy flashed before his eyes, whose level exceeded his own by at least 10 points. His pupil barely narrowed, reflecting a bloody red in the darkness. The air instantly tensed from invisible pressure. The night silence concealed the approaching danger. In the semi-darkness of the stables, two dignified figures froze, having a secret conversation. The leader of the Black Raven squad turned out to be a stern warrior named Yahello. The young man watched them intently from his hiding place, holding his breath. The other interlocutor was a gray-haired elder with a face marked by deep wrinkles. It was Danri Jongu, the mighty patriarch of the clan and bearer of the title Flying Heavenly Demonic Sword. His massive figure radiated absolute power. The patriarch gently stroked his horse, quietly bidding farewell to the faithful animal. The young man, crouching close to the ground, caught every word of the elder. The heavy boots of the patriarch softly stepped on the ground. Chanwu informed that at the next flood, the second daughter of the head of the Namgun clan is getting married. Dihyo asked in surprise if the leader was really ready to give the best horses a wedding gift. The elder slyly squinted, admitting that he would do it without hesitation if he could send one of his children to the Namgun clan. A tense pause hung in the air. Chanwu's eyes flashed with cold calculation, confirming the intention to use the child for the marriage alliance. The complexity of his intrigues left room for speculation. Continuing to stroke the animal, he coldly asked if it was not easier to cross the river on 2 logs instead of 1. The darkness of the stable seemed to thicken around him. A harsh order was sounded to achieve the goal by any means. Behind the patriarch, a terrifying aura of a demon flared, forcing unconditional submission. Dehyo's face was covered with cold sweat from pure horror at the leader's power. The elder ordered to set out at dawn, and the subordinate obediently bowed his head. Already preparing to leave, Chunwoo stopped for a final instruction. He pointed to the young man and ordered to take him along to care for the animal. Dehyo bowed low once again to the patriarch's back. The squad commander silently turned to the young man, assessing the new companion. The rest of the night was drowned in tense preparations. At dawn, an elite armed squad lined up in the square in front of the mansion. The young man leaned indifferently against the wall, holding the horse by the reins. A single question pulsed in his mind: how to acquire true knowledge of martial arts. He recalled his futile attempts to copy the movements of the clan's elite warriors, which failed due to lack of foundation. The realization of his own weakness only fueled his thirst for power. The young man continued a cold analysis of his meager chances. Imagining a bow to the mentor in his thoughts, he realized the necessity of direct training with the master. However, becoming someone's apprentice without money and connections was almost impossible. Moreover, his 18-year-old age was considered a sentence for starting serious training. Suddenly, a cunning smile blossomed on his face from the realization of the genius of the situation. His gaze stopped at the army heading to the great Namgun clan. He understood that a journey to one of the most powerful families was the perfect chance to find stronger prey. Dehyo, riding a horse, proudly inspected the formation, announcing full combat readiness. The young man silently dissolved among dozens of armed warriors. The commander noted the presence of the horse with satisfaction, but immediately frowned upon learning about the absence of young heirs. He clicked his tongue irritably, cursing the irresponsibility of the aristocrats. Dehyo loudly declared that the heir was probably drinking again, and the lady would join later, after which he commanded to move out. The commander sharply jerked the reins, rearing the horse. A massive column slowly rolled out onto the city streets. The road promised to be exhausting. Suddenly, the calm march was interrupted by a deafening explosion that blew apart the wall of the nearest building. Someone wearily grabbed their head, realizing the scale of yet another disaster. In a cloud of dust materialized Donri Gangi, the eldest son of the patriarch and a true combat genius. His body radiated a striking aura, confirming his readiness to join the Namgun clan. However, his incredible talent was completely overshadowed by his vile character. A dissolute lifestyle, alcohol, and women constantly dragged behind him a trail of dirty scandals. The warriors whispered contemptuously, watching as this scoundrel once again beat someone to near death. A new burst of green energy brutally tore through space. The commander's eyes widened with primal horror. The body of an unknown man crashed through the stone masonry amid Gang Hei's frenzied scream. While others panicked, the young man indifferently held the horse to the sounds of the system. The red text mercilessly announced the approach of the enemy with a colossal advantage in levels. The beaten man in the ruins gathered his last strength to curse his executioner. At that very moment, a devastating stream of green aura rushed straight at him. Someone screamed, understanding the inevitability of a brutal murder. The young man only gave a crooked smile, feeling the epicenter of insane power. His mind clearly registered the appearance of a true martial arts monster. The air around crystallized from the surge of magical pressure. A gray old man, completely wrapped in deadly green lightning, descended on the fallen offender. His movements radiated absolute, overwhelming superiority. The squad commander froze, completely paralyzed by fear of this entity. The victim helplessly coughed up blood, pressed into the ruins by the old man's merciless force. A cloud of dust slowly settled over the battlefield. The system blinked red once again, warning of a critical threat. The tension at the epicenter of the clash reached its absolute peak. The final stroke of green energy mercilessly cut through the air. On the battlefield among soldiers with red flags appeared a man whose face was distorted by panic and anger. Next to him stood a pale youth with red eyes, who calmly and with a barely noticeable smile watched the chaos. The youth instantly realized that a true master stood before them. In his crimson eye was reflected the terrifying figure of the opponent. An old man with wild white hair towered over the fallen enemy, radiating a devastating green aura. His skills undoubtedly exceeded any expectations. The unknown master enveloped himself with powerful streams of dark energy, turning the surrounding space into ruins. Green lightning crackled as it tore through the air. Suddenly, a sharp order to stop rang out. The mustached commander rushed forward swiftly, trying to stop the old man. Dripping with cold sweat, he introduced himself as Guy Dehyo, leader of the Black Ravens unit of the Donri clan. Before him, in the crater of swirling energy, stood the old master unflinchingly. His eyes flashed with poisonous green light as he asked the interlocutor's identity in an icy tone. Ruthlessly crushing the youth's face under rubble with his foot, the old man heard that he was a young master of the Donri clan. Jidehyo grabbed the sword hilt, threatening to attack if the old man did not immediately remove his foot. Watching this, the pale boy only thought with disgust that the commander did not even realize whom he was challenging. He understood that before them stood an unfathomable master from outside, unknown even to the leader of the elite Murim squad. The youth's blood-red eye narrowed with the realization that their current strength would never be enough for victory. The old master's eyes shone even brighter, radiating pure murderous intent. Suddenly, the youth was struck by a chilling understanding. The giant lion seemed to loom over the ants, but the boy convinced himself that they would not die. No predator would attack with full force just to crush an insect. Meanwhile, the old man casually scratched his ear and ironically asked again about the name of the Donri clan. Blowing the dust off his finger, he mockingly inquired whether it was something edible. Jidehyo flared up with rage, not believing that someone dared to openly despise his clan. In response, the old man's green eye only narrowed menacingly. Grinning ominously, the master pressed his foot harder on the captive's face, declaring that the Donri clan was just dirt under his soul. The commander gritted his teeth, unable to endure such humiliation. With eyes burning with determination, he fully drew his blade. An order was given to the entire Black Ravens unit to immediately rescue the young master. Dozens of armed warriors sprang into action like a wave, heading toward the epicenter of the green energy. The old man slowly raised his hand, curling his fingers like the claws of a predatory beast. A devastating green lightning instantly concentrated between his fingers. A gigantic clump of dazzling energy burst from his palm. A shockwave cut through the earth, sweeping away everything in its path. Yahello tried to block the strike with his sword, but the force of the attack proved excessive. His warriors were scattered in all directions like broken dolls in the eye of a hurricane. The commander was gripped by paralyzing horror upon realizing the nature of this power. Lying on the ground, he helplessly looked at the fallen squad and the unyielding old man. In his consciousness surfaced the legendary technique, flying butterfly that pursues the soul. Shuddering with fear, Yahello finally recognized his enemy. Standing before him was none other than Tanwu, poisonous hand that pursues the soul. The old man grunted with satisfaction, praising the rural soldier for his eyes not being completely blind yet. The mention of this man recalled the titles of the 20 strongest masters of Merim, among whom were the 2 gods. Next came the 3 monsters, the 5 peaks, and the 10 greats. Tanwu was the supreme master of the Sichuan Tang clan and was among the 10 greats. He stood majestically in the middle of the courtyard, while the green poisonous flame devoured the remnants of his enemy's will. The eerie green skull aura reminded everyone, those who offended Tanwu would not escape his poisonous hands even after death. The pale young man calmly stood by his horse, assessing the scale of destruction caused by one of the strongest masters. He analyzed the situation, realizing that the scoundrel from the Danri clan had provoked the catastrophic incident. The old man continued to radiate anger, and the young man understood the full gravity of the situation. Because of this insult, the Danri clan might be forced to close its doors forever. The boy mentally asked himself how this confrontation would ultimately end. Suddenly, a beautiful woman in a green dress approached the old man, affectionately calling him Grandpa. She looked indifferently at the fallen enemies and suggested leaving, calling them uneducated peasants. Hearing her voice, Tanwu's cruel eyes lost their demonic glow. A warm smile appeared on his face, and he gently agreed. A woman named Hua added that this lesson was enough for the young master to realize his own insignificance in this vast world. Tenyu slapped the unconscious youth with a swing, grumbling irritably about the impudence of the descendants of the Orthodox faction. He stated that he would usually tear off his hand, but took pity, ordering the boy to no longer court strangers, otherwise his life would end prematurely. Yahello, pressed to the ground, could only tremble from the experienced horror. In his thoughts, he fervently thanked the elder Tan for the mercy shown. The old man clicked his tongue discontentedly, and with a light finger movement sparked a green spark. The poisonous aura that bound the soldiers' bodies instantly began to dissipate. All the deadly energy obediently returned to the hands of its creator. Hua was already about to leave when Tanyu suddenly clenched his fist sharply, sensing something. His eye again flared with a terrifying green whirlwind. He slowly shifted his gaze to the pale youth who continued to stand unflinchingly among the fallen warriors. The boy calmly responded to this piercing gaze. A poisonous whirl of incredible power twisted in the old man's pupil. In response, the young man's eyes remained cold and dark, like an abyss. Tenyu ordered his granddaughter to wait in place. Stepping over bodies, the legendary master decisively headed towards the stranger. The boy tensed, trying to understand the reason for such sudden attention. In his imagination appeared a dark, threatening shadow with burning eyes advancing towards him. The footsteps approached, and the question about the reason echoed louder in his head. Tanyu stopped right next to the young man towering over him. Keeping calm, the boy directly asked if there was any business with him. The old man's eyes turned into dark voids as he dryly inquired the stranger's name. The young man froze, not uttering a single word in response. Suddenly, Tanwu's eyes exploded with green fury, and he unconditionally demanded to be told his name. The young man and the gray-haired elder stood face to face in the middle of the noisy camp. The boy mentally asked himself if this formidable master had any business with him. The elder Tanwu looked intently in response with his dark eyes and demanding asked his name. Instead of answering, the young man remained absolutely silent, calmly looking at the interlocutor. The old man's face twisted with anger, and a green spark flew from his index finger as he irritably repeated his question. The boy's eye opened wide as he suddenly felt an incredible pressure emanating from the master. Tanwu's pupil spun like a whirlpool of mystical green energy, preparing for harsh actions. The old man grinned fiercely, muttering curses at the audacious brat with displeasure. The leader of the squad suddenly intervened in the conflict, hastily crossing his arms and explaining that this groom was actually mute. Tanwu sharply turned to the commander, asking in surprise if this young man really could not speak. His gaze refocused on the boy, narrowing to a barely noticeable slit in deep thought. The young man continued to look impassively at the master from beneath his thick black hair. Suddenly, he felt a gigantic dark aura in the shape of a phantom wolf with burning green eyes looming over him. The boy mentally assumed that right now this mighty warrior was subjecting him to a meticulous examination. He caught the old man's gaze and realized that he was being looked at not as a person, but as a very precious object. The youth's eye flashed with unexpected illumination. He understood that if such an outstanding master saw a treasure in him, it opened fundamentally new paths. The boy mentally called this situation a perfect chance to change his fate. His consciousness was filled with dark determination, visualized by eerie eyes against a backdrop of a blood-red aura. It was a unique opportunity to finally shed the miserable shell of a simple, mute groom. In the next moment, Tanwu swiftly grabbed the boy's wrist, sending a powerful flow of energy through his body. The master's power pierced the flesh with green lightning discharges, thoroughly examining the youth's internal structure. Feeling the boy's hidden potential, the old man maniacally burst into loud laughter. While Tanwu turned back to the squad leader, the young man silently looked at his hand, around which a green aura continued to sparkle. The old man slyly inquired of the commander whether they were really heading to the Namgun clan to arrange a marriage alliance. Having received an affirmative answer, the master asked about the boy's role, to which he heard that he was the only one capable of controlling the gifted Fergana horse. Tanwu brazenly declared that he would take the young man for himself, but the leader panicked and objected, fearing to completely lose control over the animal. Thinking for a second, the elder placed his hand on his chin, calculating the benefit for himself. Finally, he slyly squinted his eye, satisfied with his newly devised plan. Tanwu unequivocally stated that he would personally settle this matter with the leader of the Namgun clan. He proposed to write a letter of recommendation and pay generously for the groom, leaving the squad no chance to refuse. The commander faltered, his face covered with cold sweat from realizing his own helplessness before the master. Tanwu's green eye flashed threateningly in the complete darkness, silently warning of bloody consequences of disagreement. Broken by psychological pressure, the leader hastily agreed, justifying that they had planned to give the boy along with the horse anyway. He respectfully bowed his head, pitifully begging the senior master to take the young man. Tanwu triumphantly burst out laughing across the entire square, throwing his head back, while the commander submissively hid his gaze. The old man sharply turned around and ordered the boy not to yawn, but to immediately follow him. The youth obediently led his horse after the master, leaving the confused squad leader far behind. The commander nervously grabbed his head, feeling immense stress from the encounter with this monster. Gathering his thoughts, he loudly ordered to send the young lord to the healer and the Black Raven squad to prepare for departure. The man watched with deep anxiety as the mysterious trio disappeared forever behind the gates of the residence. Meanwhile, the youth continued silently walking beside the Fergana horse, coldly contemplating his next move. Tanwu looked back at him again, and his eyes shone with a predatory, almost insane interest in his new find. Deep night fell, and a bright full moon rose in the dark sky. The squad stopped in front of a magnificent inn courtyard, brightly lit by lanterns. The commander raised his hand, announcing to all the warriors that they would stay here to rest tonight. Inside the building, life was bustling. Mercenaries actively drank and loudly discussed their affairs at massive wooden tables. Instead, outside near the horse stables, there was absolute silence and isolation. The boy sat on the stable floor in a lotus position, while his faithful horse calmly rested in the stall. In the semi-darkness, his eye flashed red as he analyzed his abilities, noting that after the last battle, the use of the inventory had significantly improved. The young man precisely calculated that the current radius for summoning items was about 1 meter around him. He placed his hand on his chest, seriously pondering whether he could increase this distance through rigorous training. This ambitious thought completely captured his consciousness, causing his pupils to narrow from concentration. In his imagination, he vividly saw himself instantly pulling hidden swords and corpses from space, mercilessly unleashing them on new opponents. However, the boy soberly assessed the speed of such a summon, realizing that a true master would easily manage to react to such an attack. To test the theory, he extended his hand forward and slowly let a handful of dry sand slip through his fingers. His gaze focused with a death grip on the tiny grains of sand, concentrating all available mental power. He mentally gave a short but clear command to activate the inventory. The sand silently poured onto his crossed legs. Suddenly, the space around him flickered, and matter began to dissolve in vertical beams of bright blue light. The young man tightly clenched his fist, which radiated mystical energy, feeling absolute control over the space under his command. The blue glow smoothly pulsed above his palm, confirming the successful absorption of sand. In the night darkness, his red eye ignited with devilish excitement from the new discovery. He satisfactorily noted that his skills in using this gift had become almost perfect and automated. Suddenly, another much riskier idea about the limits of this spatial ability flashed in his mind. The boy realized that there was another, much deeper way to use the inventory. He nervously swallowed saliva, preparing for a dangerous experiment on his own body. The blue light wrapped his figure in a powerful pillar as he understood that the rules of space acted on him quite differently. The young man came to the logical conclusion that any object or energy entering his body could be directly transferred to the spatial pocket. His face was illuminated by a creepy blue smile, for he had just discovered the true divine art of the inventory. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by light footsteps near the stable entrance, forcing the boy to instantly extinguish his aura and merge with the darkness. From the courtyard came a woman's voice, irritably complaining about the grandfather's incomprehensible and whimsical whims. Elegant heels confidently stepped onto the dusty floor of the wooden barn. Before the young man stood a luxurious woman in a green dress, openly not understanding why the master needed this ragged person in the middle of the night. She looked at him disdainfully from head to toe and dryly ordered him to get up and follow her. The boy silently lifted his heavy gaze from beneath thick hair, showing neither a drop of fear nor resistance before her. Meanwhile, in the main hall, the roadside inn, the mercenaries continued their loud feast, completely unaware of the night intrigues. The woman stopped before the massive sliding doors and respectfully warned the elder about her visit. The doors smoothly opened, releasing a column of soft light into the dark wooden corridor. In the spacious room, right before the majestic golden fresco depicting a dragon, Tan Wu meditated motionlessly. Without opening his eyes, the elder unequivocally ordered the boy to ascend the platform and sit in the lotus position. The young man swiftly assessed the surrounding situation with his impassive, piercing gaze. He obediently stepped into the center of the room, while the woman knelt by the wall, respectfully bowing her head. The boy took the indicated place on the wooden platform, straightening his back right in front of the mighty master. The old man's next command sounded sharp as a blade. He unemotionally demanded to undress immediately. The master strictly specified that the youth must remove absolutely all his clothes. Without asking unnecessary questions, the boy calmly shrugged off his worn cloak from his shoulders, exposing his back. Tanwu nodded with satisfaction, silently observing his unquestionable submission against the backdrop of the gigantic golden dragon. The old man smiled slyly, noting that the boy's bodily structure turned out to be surprisingly strong for his low status. The master extended his hand and took out a luxurious box with phoenix and dragon patterns, solemnly proclaiming that these were the legendary golden needles. Seeing the terrible artifact, the woman panicked, rising from her knees and asking what the old man intended to do with this defenseless boy. Tanwu completely ignored her hysteria, firmly and with a dull thud placing the massive box on the floor. He calmly addressed the boy, asking if he knew the ancient saying about the change of nature of things under the influence of the environment. The old man began telling a parable about how sweet southern oranges turn into bitter fruits if planted in the cold north. The boy's eye tensed as he concentrated intensely on the hidden meaning of these metaphorical words. The master drew a clear parallel, comparing the warm lands with the Donri clan and the harsh north with his native Tan clan. Placing his wrinkled hand on the box with golden needles, Tanwu grimly declared that he would now perform a great ritual over the boy's body. He mercilessly warned that the pain would be so hellish that a swift death would seem like a desired salvation to the youth. However, the elder promised that if the boy survived, he would gain unprecedented power, and his innate muteness would be forever healed in flashes of dazzling divine energy. The girl exclaimed indignantly that such a serious matter could not be decided without the consent of the clan elders. Her face froze in horror when a terrifying yellow eye of a stranger looked at her from the darkness. The old master from the Tan family approached, sternly looking at the frightened girl. She only silently opened her mouth, unable to utter a single word from paralyzing fear. A predatory, sinister smile spread across the elder's face. He laughed out loud, demonstrating his absolute power in this room. A bloody scratch suddenly appeared on the girl's slender neck, reminding of mortal danger. Behind them, against the wall with a golden dragon, the boy sat motionless as the realization of what was happening dawned. His eyes suddenly opened, shining with a piercing blood-red light. The young man finally understood the true intention of the old manipulator. Old Tan calmly sat down in front of the light box while the girl obediently knelt down. His gaze became sharp as a blade as he prepared for the next stage of the ritual. The wrinkled hand slowly opened the lid of the box, from which bright, blinding light burst forth. Bathed in radiance, the old man pulled out a golden needle and asked the boy if he was ready to accept the Tan clan surname. The young man raised his eyes, and in his red eyes was an absolutely unwavering determination. On the floor lay an exquisite golden box with a dragon, next to which two long needles gleamed. In the world of martial arts, legends about divine meridians and sacred bones that granted incredible power had existed for centuries. Merim had many names for those who were endowed from birth with exceptional abilities in martial arts. Such geniuses appeared once every 10, 100, or even 1,000 years, instantly becoming true legends. Their natural talent was more than enough to leave their mark forever in the history of Merim. But there was one unique ability that unquestionably surpassed all others. The old man remembered the day when he accidentally found this boy in the water without paying a single kopeck for him. All talks about the talents of the millennium lost any meaning next to this living find. The found youth possessed a body without a single meridian, appearing for the first time in the entire history of Merim's existence. At first, the old master thought it was just an ordinary human body that had never studied martial arts in his life. However, deep analysis showed that this body completely lacked acupuncture points and channels for energy flow. Inside, the youth reigned a complete emptiness, as if he did not belong to the human race at all. But the absence of pathways meant that any artificially created channel would become perfect if the energy was directed correctly. The old man realized that thanks to this boy, he could revive the legendary reign of 10,000 flowers. Then all of Merim would bow its head again before the terrible, devastating power of the Tan family. Feeling the future of his clan in his hands, the old man laughed maniacally, clutching the golden needle. Aiming the shining tip at the youth, he once again addressed to him with the decisive question. With a predatory gleam in his eyes, he asked if the young man truly intended to take the surname of the great Tan family. The boy barely nodded, silently confirming his unwavering choice. This consent caused considerable satisfaction in the old man, who was already mentally celebrating victory. He maliciously warned that becoming a full member of the family would be extremely difficult. The boy would have to face the elders and the clan leader, and this process could cost him his life. The old man stared intently at the youth's face, checking if he would retreat after such frightening words. However, the boy's blood-red eyes blazed with absolute, unshakable fearlessness. Enveloped in a swirling green aura, the old man loudly announced the beginning of the Great Reformation ritual. He ordered the girl Huaya to stand guard while dozens of green needles hovered in the air around the boy. Humbly bowing her head, the girl left the room to guard the entrance from uninvited guests. The old man concentrated all his green energy, preparing to pierce the body of the motionless youth. From his palm burst a powerful stream of chi, directing the instruments toward the target. Levitating needles, shining with poisonous green light, aimed at the boy's bare back. A short word sounded, marking the start of the painful process of reformation. With a sinister smile, the master made the first move, firmly gripping the main needle. The hand with the instrument slowly lowered right above the focused youth's crown. With a sharp flash of energy, the tip harshly pierced the skin on the boy's head. The needle deeply entered the body, continuing to emit a bright green glow. The thick black hair of the youth shuddered from the impact, but he did not make a single sound of pain. The boy laughed mentally, realizing that the enemies considered him deaf due to the use of hidden sound transmission. Feeling the pressure of the old man's aura, the youth continued to sit calmly in the center of the tense room. In fact, he perfectly possessed the rare skill of lip reading. His eyes sharply narrowed as he recalled his difficult past. The habit of stalking prey turned out to be the perfect tool for survival in this deadly game. Reflections of the old man about the unique body without meridians were only a convenient illusion. In the darkness of his mind, a sinister smile flashed, revealing his true predatory nature. A system window with a list of skills appeared before his eyes, completely refuting the absurd theories of the old master. This secret system and status window were invisible to the world and accessible exclusively to him. It was precisely due to the influence of the system that his body acquired such a strange form, which the entire Merim mistakenly considered a legendary gift. Old Tanwu, having no idea about the system, invented a brilliant legend for himself about the body without meridians. The young man quickly decided to use this fatal mistake to his advantage. He only had to flawlessly play the imposed role of the obedient apprentice instrument. Meanwhile, the old man was dripping with sweat from the tension, inserting new and new needles into the body. The boy's back turned into a solid hedgehog of shining green needles, forming a combat body never seen before. The master wiped the sweat from his forehead, amazed that the temporarily created acupuncture points worked absolutely perfectly. The chi energy flowed along the youth's back in the form of branching lightning, moving several times faster than an ordinary master's. The old man's eye widened with sincere reverence before this incredible talent. But behind this admiration immediately hid a dark, paranoid thought. His hand again flared with a green aura, sharply reaching for another smaller box. From under the lid burst a dark, poisonous mist that concealed a vile and dangerous content. Inside squirmed dozens of disgusting insects, among which stood out one huge centipede. The old man decided to become even more cautious, perfectly understanding the colossal value of his creation. Hooking the centipede with a needle, he prepared for the most insidious part of the ritual. He mentally cried out that he could not allow this priceless treasure to fall into someone else's hands. With a mad look, the old man brought the poisonous insect right to the ear of the motionless youth. It was a giyu, a parasitic insect that was meant to serve as a deadly insurance in case of any betrayal. The centipede slowly crawled into the boy's ear, while the old man's face twisted with maniacal lust for power. He mentally swore that he would tear the youth to pieces with his own hands if he lost control over him. Dark energy and green aura chaotically intertwined in the room, marking the completion of the ominous ritual. The old master's hands moved incessantly, securely fixing the last needles in the body. Each of his movements was precise and merciless, piercing the youth's flesh with cold green light. The boy's body glowed brightly from dozens of needles, greedily absorbing the artificially created meridians. Outside the window, dawn had already begun, coloring the clouds in gentle pink shades. The first rays of the sun softly illuminated the majestic residence of the powerful Tan family. The heavy wooden doors of the room where the ritual took place remained tightly closed. The exhausted old man heavily sank into his seat, catching his breath and looking at the result of the night's work. Towering over the youth like a dark deity, Tanwu loudly announced the successful completion of the reformation. He proudly declared that from now on the boy was no longer a miserable groom, but a full member of the greatest Sichuani clan. The youth knelt, breathing heavily and silently waiting for his new name. From above came the authoritative voice of the old man, who solemnly named him Tansam. The boy obediently bowed his head, completely hiding the expression on his face in the shadow of thick hair. From his lips flew a short, perfectly played confirmation of his loyalty. Meanwhile, the exhausted Huaya continued to stand guard, dozing off from fatigue under the door. Suddenly, the doors behind her slowly opened with a dull, prolonged creak. Tansam silently passed by the girl, paying no attention to her presence. Wearing his new clan clothes, he confidently walked across the courtyard, bathed in morning sunlight. From behind, he looked like an ordinary, obedient youth, newly accepted into the great family. But as soon as he moved to a safe distance, a blue aura flared in his palm, and he mercilessly crushed the poisonous centipede goo, splattering blood in all directions. A wild, bloodthirsty smile of a beast that had finally broken free blossomed on his face. The mute, miserable Selsum from the Danri family ceased to exist forever. The boy sharply punched the air, leaving behind a bloody trail from the destroyed parasite. His past life vanished without a trace in an instant. The speed of his movements became so phenomenal that the body blurred against the dawn. Now he was Tan Sam, the new uncontrollable force of the Tan family. Casting off the shackles of foreign manipulation, he spread his arms towards the morning sun as drops of blood fell down. In his mind, he triumphantly declared that the acquired power of the clan would become his new wings on the path to absolute power. A huge multi-tiered fortress loomed eerily against the backdrop of a giant full moon. On the spacious balcony of the estate, silence reigned, disturbed only by a light night breeze. From behind the closed bedroom door came muffled sounds, breaking the nighttime atmosphere. In the half-darkness of the room, a man with long silvery hair hovered over a disheveled woman. The room was filled with heavy sighs and broken moans. From the sharp surge of emotions, the woman's hand convulsively clenched the silk sheets. The pink-haired girl threw her head back, breathing heavily in ecstasy. Drops of sweat glistened near her squinting eyes from extreme physical tension. Suddenly, from under the ceiling, A killer in a mask silently fell with a clenched dagger and shining eyes. The woman was the first to notice the threat, and her face instantly distorted with genuine horror. The silver-haired man immediately reacted to her scream, casting a predatory glance over his shoulder. He mercilessly threw the companion under the blade, and the walls were splattered with bloody droplets. Using the girl as a living shield, the master of the room swiftly jumped back to a safe distance. He slowly straightened up, tensely looking at the dark silhouette near the window. His face was hidden in shadow, but in his mind he refused to believe in the appearance of this enemy. The man irritably looked over his luxurious robe, which was now hopelessly spoiled with someone else's blood. He hissed indignantly that this silk from the West had cost a fortune. Clenching his fist in rage, he aggressively moved toward the armed mercenary. With a predatory glare, he coldly inquired about the attacker's identity. In response, the killer's eyes under the mask only flashed brighter with cold light. Without unnecessary words, the attacker lunged forward, leaving behind a thick trail of dark energy. The room was illuminated by a dazzling flash from the fierce collision. The silver-haired man stretched out his hand to the wall, summoning a bright pulsation of violet magic. The katana blade instantly flew off the stand, drawn by an invisible force. The man skillfully caught the weapon's hilt right in midair. Two devastating auras, violet and black, clashed in an epic head-on confrontation. In the clinch, a mad smile spread across the master's face, while the killer maintained a grim concentration. The attacker cursed mentally, not expecting such terrible physical power from the target. The maniac's eyes flared with a demonic gleam in anticipation of a bloody reprisal. With swirling energy, he disdainfully told the mercenary that he was too weak. With one devastating swing of the sword, he threw the enemy to the other end of the hall. Following the body flew a giant arc of concentrated violet light. The killer perfectly grouped and landed on his feet in the middle of the shattered room. The master did not give him even a second, unleashing a barrage of chaotic magical strokes. Using shadow teleportation, the attacker dissolved into a black whirlwind, avoiding fatal hits. The silver-haired man squinted sharply, instantly recognizing this unique style of movements. His energy waves only vainly tore apart the wooden floor. Dark matter began to rapidly thicken, forming the silhouette of the opponent. The mercenary's blade materialized with an ominous crack from absolute darkness. The enemy unleashed a powerful counterattack, exploding with black lightning. From beneath the stream of destructive force, a single shining eye flashed again. The master watched in fascination as the black aura completely dominated the space before him. His anger turned to surprise upon realizing that this was truly the legendary sword-killing technique. Before his inner vision appeared the image of a burly, elderly warrior from the past. In memories, the old man strictly etched the exact time of their separation, 9 years and 190 days. Returning to reality, the man broke the silence of the room with a hysterical, mad laughter. He relaxedly leaned back in the armchair, noting the perfect memory of the old acquaintance Crazy Cloud. With a sly smile, he asked about the reason for such an unexpected personal visit. The mercenary unemotionally replied that the time had come to implement the first strategy. The master's eyes opened wide, brightly flashing in the semi-darkness. His hand with painted nails nervously grabbed the edge of the table, barely trembling with excitement. Whispering about the long-awaited beginning, he grinned maniacally and asked about the status of Fickle Shadow. The killer calmly reported that the wedding of their ally in the Namgun clan was scheduled for the 15th. The silver-haired man froze in shock, stunned by the news of the marriage. His pupils sharply contracted from the sudden realization of the grand plan. He predatorily leaned forward, struck by the guess about the true role of their agent. From tension, he clenched his jaws with force, savoring the coming chaos. Mastering his emotions, he businesslike clarified the scale of the upcoming purge. The face of the old warrior under the mask remained an impenetrable stone. The fingers of the silver-haired man impatiently drummed a rhythm on the surface of the table. The mercenary announced a merciless verdict. Absolutely everyone was subject to destruction, except for 2 targets. Hearing the order, the finger with the red nail froze above the tabletop. He pressed forcefully into the wood, finally sealing the bloody deal. In the blood-soaked room, a heavy silence hung, marking the beginning of a ruthless massacre. The bloodied leader, barely standing, coldly noted that the poisonous hand would soon arrive in Manhwa, and their forces to resist would be catastrophically insufficient. The stern, muscular warrior, behind whom loomed terrifying silhouettes, declared unequivocally that in that case, 5 shadows would enter the battle. From the leader's lowered fingers, thick blood slowly dripped as he tensely pondered what he had heard. A shadow of doubt flashed across his face, and with undisguised irony, he asked again if that was really so. Suddenly, the corners of his lips twitched, spreading into a barely noticeable predatory smile. His face was completely engulfed in darkness, leaving visible only the demonic pink gleam of his eyes and a bloodthirsty snarl as he whispered with satisfaction that this would be quite enough. From the impenetrable darkness came a muffled voice, reporting the successful transmission of all orders. The muscular warrior silently turned around and headed towards the exit with heavy, echoing steps. Stopping right by the door, he slightly turned his head over his shoulder, preparing to add one more important detail. Later, the blonde, whose body was still covered in wounds, relaxedly slumped into a wooden chair near his sword and asked with feigned curiosity what the name of that very variable shadow was. From the thick darkness of the room, the sharp, barely noticeable profile of the mysterious interlocutor instantly emerged. At that very moment, the black silhouette abruptly sprang up, dissolving into the air with an ominous whistle and leaving behind only a smoky trail. The leader laughed loudly, covering his face with his hand, and with undisguised sarcasm remarked that this guy was as unbearable as ever. Slowly leaning his hand on the table, he venomously muttered that he felt simply incredible envy. Continuing his thought, he admitted that he had always considered shadows doomed to an eternal, miserable existence in solitude. However, rising from his seat, he bitterly reminded that the variable shadow had managed to become a true hero of the righteous faction and even took the most beautiful woman of Manhwa as his wife. At that very second, his face distorted with uncontrollable rage, and veins appeared on his temples from the realization that he was forced to rot ingloriously in this gloomy place. Trying to calm his anger, he stepped out onto the open balcony, casting a heavy gaze over the night landscape. A sharp snap of his fingers cut through the silence like an unequivocal order to act. Immediately behind him, a submissive subordinate materialized instantly with thick black smoke. Looking distrustfully into the distance, the leader ordered in an icy tone to immediately clean the room and get rid of all the dirt on the bed. His voice became even more threatening as he made a short, tense pause before the next instruction. Turning to the bowed shadow, he gave a harsh order with burning eyes to mercilessly kill all the guards who were on duty that day. The old assassin in a dark kimono obediently knelt, confirming readiness to carry out the bloody mission. The subordinate respectfully bowed his head, addressing him as the branch leader. Left alone, the blond man again turned to the railings, gazing into the endless sea of lights of the night city. His lonely figure majestically towered over the vast settlement, glowing with thousands of lanterns deep in the valley. Before him stretched a monumental, multi-tiered pagoda that served as the main base of the divine cult of the heavenly demon in Manhwa. He was her absolute master, the branch leader, known as the naked silver demon Pagahyol. His gaze remained impenetrable and calm, devoid of any compassion or doubt. The same eerie, blood-tinged smile played again on the demon's lips. He mentally declared that the real, merciless game was starting right now. Meanwhile, far beyond the city limits, a narrow mountain path gently descended to brightly lit Manhwa. Countless feet in dark boots synchronously and silently stamped on the stone road. A huge army under red banners relentlessly advanced on the city under the cold glow of the full moon. At the head of the column, the riders sharply pulled the reins, stopping their horses before the grand panorama. The gray-haired commander noted with surprise that they had arrived much earlier than expected, while the young man beside him reverently realized that this was the territory of the powerful Namgun clan. Before their eyes stretched an incredible view of the Grand Manhwa, above which rose thousands of golden sky lanterns. The city of Manhwa stood still in anticipation of the inevitable. The next morning, the settlement's streets buzzed with life. Townspeople celebrated, prepared for the event, and enjoyed performances by artists. But the festive idyll was suddenly interrupted by the rough cry of the guard, who pointed a spear at a group of miserable beggars near the luxurious estate. The destitute fell to their knees in despair, begging to be given at least a tiny handful of rice. The guard's face twisted with rage and disgust at the uninvited guests. He aggressively swung his weapon, ordering the vagrants to get away and not spoil the celebration, while they continued to plead for pitiful leftovers. Losing patience, the guard kicked one of the beggars in the chest with all his might. The poor man flew back with a scream onto the stone pavement, and his frightened companions rushed to him, shouting for help. Suddenly, another guard tensed, hearing a commanding but calm voice from the darkness of the gates, asking about the cause of the noise. Into the light majestically stepped a young stately warrior in exquisite white and blue robes, radiating incredible confidence. Excited whispers immediately spread through the crowd. People instantly recognized in him Do-hyo Ok, the main star of the upcoming banquet, amazed by his appearance and status. The youth calmly approached the fallen beggar, causing the guard to freeze in confusion. A warm, sincere smile appeared on the warrior's face as he kindly extended a helping hand to the victim, asking if he was all right. The beggars stunnedly raised their heads, unable to believe that such a respected person had paid attention to them. Ignoring the shocked guards, Do-hyo gently handed food and coins to the destitute. Then he addressed the guards, ordering them to distribute the leftovers of the dishes to these people, since there was still plenty of time before the wedding. The guard obediently bowed his head, agreeing to carry out the order of the young master, who was already calmly returning to the estate. Witnesses of this scene could not contain their admiration, praising not only the young man's outstanding combat skills, but also his incredible nobility, through which the daughter of the Namgun clan fell madly in love with him. Legends circulated in the city about how this lone traveler managed to defeat two terrible demons that had terrorized the world for decades, and rightfully became the son-in-law of the most powerful clan. Suddenly, the relaxed atmosphere was shattered by a powerful blow. One of the townspeople was brutally thrown aside, right in the middle of the street. The outraged man instantly jumped up, shouting aggressively at the offender and demanding that he watch where he was going. But his anger instantly turned into primal horror when he recognized in his opponent the terrifying old man with a sinister aura, the infamous poisonous hand, Tanwu. The old man, without any emotion, extended his hand and gripped the frightened man's face with a deathly grasp. With incredible strength, Tanwu hurled the townsman away, coldly saying that he was standing in his way. Without slowing his pace, the merciless old man moved forward with his group, irritably muttering about the worthlessness of everyone around. At the entrance to the residence, Do-hyo was casually talking with an old monk, ignoring the noisy crowd around. The young man smiled warmly at his interlocutor, radiating complete calm despite the general bustle. Suddenly, the space was torn by a deafening scream of the enraged elder Tang, who rudely demanded silence. The formidable guest boldly inquired whether he had ended up in a place where he was categorically forbidden to be. His eyes filled with fury as he ordered all the dissatisfied to express their complaints directly to his face. Do-hyo immediately intervened, respectfully urging Master Tang to calm his anger. The boy politely bowed his head, officially introducing himself to the irritated guest. The elder scrutinized him with a piercing gaze, finally understanding that it was because of this young man that he had traveled such a long way. Assessing his opponent, the guest coldly acknowledged his abilities, but emphasized that the young man's talents ended there. Tang openly expressed his disappointment with this meeting, causing Do-hyo to blink in confusion. Without wasting time on explanations, the old man sharply asked about the head of the Byok clan, to which the young man confirmed his presence inside. Understanding the guest's intentions, Do-hyo quickly ran ahead to lead him to the hall. While the young man rushed to the entrance, a terrifying dark figure silently appeared behind his back. It was a boy with a pale face and empty, unnaturally large eyes from which emanated a deadly cold. Suddenly, a system warning about the approach of an enemy with a colossal level difference flashed before his eyes. Dark-haired Tang Sam in green attire stood absolutely motionless, like a predator studying a new prey. Hyo tensed, analyzing the perfectly even, almost mechanical pace of movements of this mysterious master. Cold sweat appeared on the youth's forehead from the chilling realization that this stranger was the extraordinary threat. The observer's blood-red eyes narrowed, scanning the opponent with frightening inhuman precision. Reading the biomechanics of the body, the system recorded that every ordinary person has natural asymmetry. However, the figure of the analysis object did not fit any physiological norms of mortals. His movements and balance turned out to be too perfect to belong to anyone alive. The realization struck like lightning. This creature belonged to the same predatory species, skillfully disguised in a foreign shell. It was yet another merciless predator, ready for bloody hunting. Meanwhile, the majestic royal hall of the Namgun clan monumentally towered against the backdrop of a cloudless sky. On the roof of the residence, rows of embedded blades gleamed menacingly, left there as a sign of power. The company stopped in front of the building, gazing at the swords of past clan heads. Tang only snorted contemptuously, declaring that all these arrogant kings would rot equally in their graves. When Du Hyok politely asked to wait outside, the elder refused rudely and categorically. His heavy boot decisively and loudly stepped onto the stone stairs of the residence. The old man stubbornly said that the clan leader had already waited too long for his visit. The huge, massive doors slowly opened, revealing the luxurious interior of the spacious hall. Seeing the guest, the clan leader and his granddaughter turned to the door in surprise. Someone among those present hastily took a few steps on the soft carpet towards the guest. The clan leader respectfully greeted Tang, calling him uncle and noting that their separation had lasted an eternity. Tang critically examined the clan head, mockingly reproaching him for losing his leadership dignity. On the face of the gray-haired master, instead of the expected anger, a good-natured, sincere smile blossomed. The leader burst out laughing, joyfully acknowledging that his cheeky uncle had not changed at all over the years. Tanghua only widened her eyes in surprise, silently observing this warm reunion. The girl was mentally struck by how close her grandfather and the head of the powerful clan really were. Suddenly, a rustle was heard behind, and Do Hyok entered the hall, drawing his attention. The blonde girl smiled happily, greeting Hua after a long separation. The young man elegantly bowed his head in a perfect social bow, showing maximum respect. Apologizing for the morning rush, Hyok introduced himself, after which Hua playfully asked if she could call him son-in-law from now on. He's blonde cheeks instantly flushed with a deep blush from such an unexpected and frank flirtation from her friend. Du Hyok laughed cheerfully, supporting the joke and noting that he never thought Shy Hye would marry before Hua. The embarrassed bride covered her face with her hand, desperately trying to hide her emotions from those present. Her eyes nervously darted around, unable to withstand that playful look from under her fingers. The awkward pause was broken by the appearance of a dark-haired young man who slowly approached the group. He introduced himself absolutely calmly and mechanically as Tang Sam, maintaining an unwavering facial expression. Du Hyok instantly broke into a wide smile, extending his hand warmly for a greeting. Tang Sam looked down at the outstretched palm in surprise, as if studying this incomprehensible gesture. His crimson eye flashed predatory, analyzing the situation lightning fast. Eventually, the stranger responded to the handshake, putting on a fake but convincing smile. Suddenly, Du Hyok joyfully clapped his hands, as if he had just been struck by a brilliant idea. He enthusiastically announced his plans to go for an evening walk to Soho Lake together with Hye. The young man casually suggested that Tang Sam and Hua join their nighttime outing. For a moment, a cunning, sinister smile flashed across Do Hyok's face, clearly revealing his hidden motives. That same night, the surface of Soho Lake was covered with thousands of glowing lanterns under the cold light of the full moon. The company lined up on the wooden pier, mesmerized by the golden, shimmering water. Hua sincerely admired the beauty of this place, enjoying the night views of the ancient city. To Hyok confidently remarked that Lake Soho has always been famous for its stunning views. Reaching out to the lights of the night city, he significantly added that today's view is especially impressive and unforgettable. The women enjoyed the beauty of the moon, brightly reflected in the calm waters of the lake. While the girls were engrossed in conversation, a young man with his hair tied in a ponytail kindly offered the main character a drink together. With a friendly smile, the boy turned around and headed for the wine, leaving the interlocutor on the deck. The hero pondered, realizing that at first glance, Tahi Ok seemed like the perfect candidate for the son-in-law of a powerful clan. He clearly understood that this man was not at all who he pretended to be. The young man carefully examined the massive superstructure of the ship, gathering his suspicions. A clear thought pulsed in his mind. This aristocrat is a true predator under a perfect mask. The hero grimly assumed that a person of such scale was definitely planning something extremely serious. However, the most important thing remained unclear: when exactly he would start acting and what his true goal was. Lowering his gaze to the night waters, the boy felt himself involuntarily becoming a pawn in a large and invisible game. Suddenly, a system notification flashed before his eyes. An unknown enemy, at least 10 levels higher, approached within 20 meters. The young man instantly turned around, scanning the empty deck and adjacent cabins with his gaze. His face froze and his pupils flashed with an alarming red light. He cursed inwardly, realizing that this powerful aura did not belong to Du Hyok at all. Quickly assessing the dimensions of the vessel, the hero calculated that the ship was about 25 meters long and 5 meters high. Leaning over the side, he strained his eyes, peering into the complete darkness below. The conclusion suggested itself. The unknown opponent was hiding right on the lower deck. At that moment, his recent interlocutor returned with a bottle in hand, apologizing for the delay. The hero's pupils narrowed, and his gaze became as cold and piercing as possible. Now he was absolutely certain that another deadly, dangerous enemy had appeared on the ship. The huge ship continued to quietly cut through the water under the glow of the full moon. The system confirmed his worst suspicions. The danger was already very close. The boy with a tail joyfully extended the vessel, boasting that he brought this rare wine especially for Tainsama. The hero stood unflinchingly, keeping a safe distance from his interlocutor. Wearing a polite smile, he complained of stomach pain and asked for permission to step away briefly. The young man willingly agreed, advising to ask the local boatmen for directions. As soon as the hero turned away, a predatory and sinister shadow flickered on his interlocutor's face. The hero entered the dark room, leaving behind the light of the night deck. His quiet footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as he cautiously delved into the ship's depths. The system relentlessly counted down the distance. 14, 13, 12 meters to the mighty enemy. Suddenly, the readings changed, and he noticed that the opponent began to retreat. However, the relief was short-lived, as the distance again started to rapidly decrease. The red interface signaled a critical approach. 4 meters. The hero froze in the semi-darkness of the cabin, watching the system count down the last seconds. He mentally noted that he had already identified 2 dangerous opponents on board. The numbers on the screen mercilessly decreased. 4, 3, 2, 1. A long, ominous shadow from a figure frozen in the doorway fell on the wooden floor. The young man instantly counted the total number of threats, realizing that together with Dohyoke, there were 5 of them. From the darkness emerged a piercing gaze of blood-red eyes, confirming that all the enemies surpassed him by dozens of levels. Looking at the calm waters, the hero understood. If their goal had been to kidnap the girl, they would have done it long ago. Since nothing had happened to her, the scale of their plan was much worse. The boy raised his eyes to the luxurious residence brightly lit under the night sky. All the facts indicated that the true target was the mighty Namgun clan itself. Realizing this, the hero clenched the wooden railings with force, almost breaking them into splinters. In his imagination appeared the dark silhouettes of 4 enemies, each of whom was a true monster. The complete darkness of the unknown was frightening, as he could not even assess the real gap in their combat abilities. The secret infiltration of 4 such masters meant only one thing: a bloody massacre was approaching. He clearly realized that these people came to completely destroy the influential Namgun clan. Leaning over the side, the young man bitterly admitted that he was caught between a rock and a hard place. On one side acted the cunning Tang Wu, and on the other, powerful enemies of the residents were approaching. The ship was rapidly approaching the waterway, and the hero made a firm decision to act immediately. The massive bow of the vessel came close to another ship. The flotilla confidently continued its movement along the moonlit river. Meanwhile, at the riverside outpost, 2 guards lazily patrolled the stone wall. They approached a massive fortress tower, near which torches were brightly blazing. One of the subordinates asked the commander with dissatisfaction whether they really needed to trudge all the way to the waterway itself. The stern squad leader instantly became angry, aggressively calling the subordinate a freak. He grimly leaned toward the soldier, barking that the order to check the territory in return was not something overly complicated. The frightened guard tried to justify himself, calling the task pointless, but the commander harshly grabbed him by the head. With a furious scream, the squad leader threw his subordinate straight into the stone wall. 2 other guards silently watched as the commander contemptuously called them lazy. He crossed his arms irritably, complaining that a true warrior should be cutting off enemy heads on the battlefield, not standing around here. His face twisted into a malicious smile as he hissed that the appearance of even one enemy would have made this night a much more entertaining trial. In the damp darkness of the dungeon, the quiet splash of footsteps on the flooded floor echoed. 2 guards slowly trudged through the tunnel, lighting their way with a single dim torch. One of them grumbled discontentedly that everyone else was feasting now, while they were forced to wander in the dark. He turned to his younger partner, expecting support, but received no response. Suddenly, from the impenetrable darkness came a heavy, eerie exhale. The guards flinched in surprise, realizing that an enemy was hiding in the shadows. In the next moment, steel flashed, and the senior guard froze as someone's blade clashed with his partner's weapon. Sparks from the unexpected strike tore through the darkness of the dungeon. With a dull sound, the blade mercilessly cut through flesh, unleashing a bloody fountain. The body fell, raising a high spray of splashes in the icy water. The unknown killer, with burning eyes, delivered another devastating blow, leaving the victim no chance. The weapon of the slain slipped from the dead hands and with a splash plunged into the water. The darkness was again torn apart by the eerie sounds of broken bones and torn flesh. The face of the surviving guard was distorted by inhuman horror in the last moment of his life. Meanwhile, in a remote part of the dungeon, the squad commander frowned displeased, realizing that the patrol was taking too long to return. He irritably scratched the back of his head, assuming that his subordinates had again decided to shirk work. The man decisively grabbed the wooden handle of the torch, preparing to give them a harsh scolding. He angrily promised himself to teach the slackers a lesson and moved deeper into the flooded corridors. With each step, the thick darkness of the dungeon seemed increasingly oppressive. Suddenly, a flame snatched from the darkness a severed hand that eerily swayed on the water. The commander instinctively jumped back, cursing in shock at what he saw. Panic instantly gripped his mind, and he rushed forward, headlong, shouting the names of his soldiers. He raced through dark corridors, waving a torch towards the unknown. The commander sharply turned the corner, desperately hoping to find his men alive. But he suddenly stopped, nearly slipping in the bloody water. His eye twitched nervously, and his pupil dilated from primal horror. Before him lay a true slaughter. The bodies of his subordinates were cruelly impaled on their own weapons like pieces of meat. The distorted corpses hung in the air, dripping blood profusely onto the cold stone slabs. The man froze, unable to utter anything except pitiful babbling. Suddenly, he noticed among the bloody mess a dark silhouette calmly searching one of the bodies. The young man with empty, dead eyes slowly turned around, indifferently explaining that he simply lacked a hand. At that very moment, the water beneath the killer's feet exploded from a superhuman surge. He lunged at the commander like a swift shadow, raising a shining sword for a deadly strike. The veteran barely managed to react, eyes wide open at the furious speed of the attacker. The killer's eyes glinted ominously, crimson in the complete darkness. The clash of blades produced a powerful blue flash of energy that blinded both for a moment. The commander gritted his teeth, trying to withstand the merciless thrust of the enemy's sword. He mentally admitted that this freak was much stronger than he had expected. His own aura flared with blue light as he put all his strength into a solid defense. The attacker sharply closed the distance, gracefully jumping back across the water surface. The commander finally recognized him and shouted fiercely that he was the very guest who brought the deadly poison. Pointing the sword at the youth, he demanded an answer as to why the guest had arranged this ruthless slaughter. The killer stood absolutely still in the shadow, like a ghost, showing no emotion. With icy calm, he replied that he does this exclusively for the Namgun clan. These words provoked blind rage in the veteran, and he shouted that the cruel murder of their masters has nothing to do with this. Exploding with blue energy, the commander swore that his enemy would not die an easy death. The young man instantly activated the first form of sword art, enveloping himself in a sinister red aura. Both warriors simultaneously unleashed their most powerful techniques, striving to end the fight with a single strike. The blades clashed in a destructive collision, producing a dazzling flash from the fusion of red and blue energies. The blast wave stirred the water, creating a real whirlpool in the narrow tunnel. Powerful currents struck the ancient stone walls with force. Breaking through the turbulent water, the commander frantically launched a counterattack. He unleashed a hail of energy blades, screaming hysterically that he would tear the boy to pieces. The young man calmly observed the barrage of attacks, cold-bloodedly calculating each trajectory. Dozens of deadly slashes cut through the space, mercilessly shredding the air and water. The killer maneuvered lightning fast, retreating under the furious pressure of the experienced veteran. Suddenly, the system window flickered with an alarm signal, warning of the boy's critically low health level. The commander, sensing a near victory, poured all his rage into a final devastating sword swing. A huge wave of power struck the boy, causing blood to spray into the air. The veteran laughed maniacally, fully confident that his enemy was left weaponless forever. But his maniacal laughter suddenly stopped, and his face froze in absolute shock. Right before his eyes flashed a blood-red trace from an elusive attack. The killer, moving faster than thought, easily slipped through the veteran's absolute defense. The boy landed in the water far behind his opponent, raising a cloud of splashes. The commander stood motionless, shockingly realizing his own death and not understanding how a weaponless enemy could deliver a fatal blow. The enemy realized with horror that he had miraculously escaped death, for a moment longer, and his face would have been split in half by an unknown magic. From the darkness of the dungeon, the silhouette of the boy instantly emerged, relentlessly rushing across the water surface with a weapon in hand. Pushing off the water with incredible force, he raised a spray of splashes and lunged forward. The opponent barely managed to block the powerful horizontal sword strike coming from the left, fiercely gritting his teeth. The blades clashed with a piercing ring, sparking bright sparks in the cold air. The young man swiftly changed trajectory, making his blade cut through space with a blue flash. His eyes flashed with an unearthly light as he continued his frantic dance on the water, preparing for a new attack. The old master shuddered, realizing in panic that the opponent's weapon had suddenly disappeared from his sight. The enemy's pupil dilated from primal fear of the inevitable danger hidden in the darkness. A devastating blow struck the old man, breaking through his defense and creating a powerful shockwave around him. Under the light of the full moon, a water column rose high from the terrible force of the collision. The enemy's body, like a broken doll, was thrown far back directly into the swirling waves of the dungeon. The man's face was distorted by a grimace of absolute horror as he mentally screamed that this time he would surely die. Blood gushed from his split face like a fountain, coloring the air crimson during the flight. The exhausted body continued its rapid movement backward, relentlessly approaching the massive stone column. A deafening roar sounded, and the man crashed headlong into the wall, raising a high wave of water and dust. Realizing that the attack had ceased, the enemy cautiously opened his eyes, shockingly trying to assess the situation. Seeing the young man who had weakly fallen to his knees, the old man slyly assumed that his previous strike had indeed worked. The enemy laughed hysterically, clutching his head and rejoicing that his fear had been completely unfounded. Meanwhile, the boy was breathing heavily, holding his bloodied chest and barely standing on his feet. He clearly understood that he had received critical damage, and his vital signs were rapidly falling. The system window mercilessly confirmed his fears. The health bar was flashing red on the brink of death. HP indicators had dropped to a critical minimum, leaving no chances for a prolonged fight. However, the young man's gaze did not fade. He saw that only a few experience points remained until the next level. In his mind, a crazy, but the only possible rescue plan instantly matured. The boy's face stretched into a terrifying smile and his eyes flashed with a predatory bloody light. With incredible speed, he tore away from the spot, leaving behind only a blurred white trail. Cutting through the water surface under the downpour, he rushed swiftly towards the enemy, ignoring his own mortal wounds. The old man confidently grinned, calling the youth a madman who seeks his own death, and unleashed his powerful aura. Around the master, a mighty blue energy flared, forming the final form of the Sword of the Heavenly Wind. Seeing the boys approach, he shouted in shock, suspecting him of a desire for mutual destruction. The youth mentally cut off all doubts, fearlessly flying straight into the whirlpool of enemy energy. Shining streams of wind sliced through space, but the hero swung his blade for a decisive strike. His gaze remained icy and focused solely on the target, despite the mortal threat. Breaking through the energy storm, the boy's body was covered with new deep cuts, from which blood spurted like a fountain. The enemy tried to counterattack with a powerful kick while falling, attempting to push the wounded youth into the water. The devastating collision almost tore the boy in half, but he steadfastly endured the pressure, raising the waves. The old man laughed arrogantly again, raising his blade over the youth who dared not know his place. His face twisted with rage and sadistic joy as he called the boy an annoying freak and prepared to finish the fight. But instead of fear, he saw a creepy smile on the boy's mutilated face, from whose mouth burst a dazzling blue light. The enemy stared in shock, barely managing to mutter a curse before the inevitable blow. The young man's body exploded with a powerful pillar of energy, completely destroying any defense of the old man. Heavy drops of blood thickly splattered on the ground, washing the boots of the defeated master. A deep mortal wound on his neck opened, flooding everything around with crimson streams. The lifeless body of the opponent fell on his back right into a pool of blood, marking the end of the brutal fight. Before the eyes of the exhausted young man, a bright system message about the long-awaited level up instantly popped up. A shining blue aura immediately enveloped his motionless body, restoring life forces with a powerful flow. A gigantic pillar of light pierced the night clouds, illuminating the huge palace complex from above. The divine glow was so intense that its bright reflection dispersed the darkness over the entire city. Inside the residence, Witnesses of the phenomenon tensely froze near the walls, watching the mystical flash. Other residents of the estate also went outside, looking enchanted and frightened toward the light. The old man and the girl sat on the shore of the lake, watching as the divine ray cut into the night sky above the horizon. A tall, half-naked man, holding a severed head by the hair in his hand, irritably asked what kind of devilry was happening. Against the backdrop of a blood-stained wall and with mutilated bodies of enemies appeared a terrifying silhouette, cold-bloodedly stating the completion of the bloody mission. At that very moment, in another part of the region, a massive fire mercilessly devoured the main residence of the Donri clan. In the midst of the fiery hell, the head of the Donri clan, Chongwu, stood alone, gripping his sword ready for the last battle. From the thick smoke and tongues of flame slowly emerged a massive dark silhouette of the attacker, wrapped in a deadly aura. A gigantic fighter in a mask approached closely to the old leader, looming over him with an inevitable deadly threat. The head of the clan stunnedly asked the unknown monster who he was and why he was carrying out this cruel massacre. He did not finish his question about the reasons for the clan's destruction when a massive blade lightning fast sliced through the air. The severed head of Danri Chongwu, with horror forever imprinted on his face, fell silently onto the bloodstained ground. The beheaded body of the leader heavily collapsed onto the stone floor, surrounded by sparks of the dying fire. The attacker shook the blood off his weapon with a sharp movement, remaining absolutely calm and emotionless. He gave his subordinate a brief order to deliver a message to the mysterious Ashen Shadow. The man ruthlessly concluded that the Danri clan was completely destroyed, and it was time to proceed with the execution of the grand plan. The woman with long gray hair shuddered, and her gaze froze with all-encompassing animal terror. A man's hand authoritatively reached out to her in the moonlight, while the dark tentacles of the aura fiercely surged upward. The pale-faced man in a torn purple robe stated with disgust the dead woman's belonging to the Donri clan, feeling only disappointment at the swift execution. He remained alone with the corpse on the riverbank, staring into the lights of the majestic fortress across the water. A predatory smile played on his face as he mentally mocked the pitiful attempts of the enemies to resist. However, this brief pause made him ponder the further plan of action. The impregnable citadel of the Namgun clan continued to shine brightly under the full moonlight, unaware of the danger. The man threw the robe over his shoulder and moved into the darkness of the forest, realizing that the previous flash of light was too loud for the style of their allies. A troubling thought flashed through his mind that the Namgun elite might have uncovered their plan. The shadowy spy instantly fell to his knees before his master, receiving a harsh order to immediately block all routes to Manhwa. An army of masked warriors silently lined up in the forest, obediently accepting the command to begin the first phase of the bloody strategy. On the bloodstained wall of the residence appeared a chilling message left directly above the mutilated bodies of the clan guards. The bloody hieroglyphs screamed that with the coming of the full moon, even the emperor himself would fall. The next part of the inscription foretold the inevitable approach of the new true king. The elders froze in shock before the wall, reading the audacious words of the killer who promised to seize power with slow but sure steps. The face of the clan leader darkened as frightened subordinates began feverishly searching for the culprit in this brutal feud. Moonlight flooded the endless roofs of the estate, while the old man finally realized that someone had opened a direct hunt on them. He ordered to immediately strengthen the security, as only a few days remained until the long-awaited wedding. His sharp voice made the elders shudder as he unequivocally ordered to report to him about the slightest suspicious activity. One of the elders, hiding in the shadows, grimly deciphered the message, identifying the emperor as the Namgun clan itself, and the full moon as the night of the upcoming wedding. In the air hung a single terrible question about who exactly dared to call himself the new king. The head of the clan trudged heavily through the dark corridor, feeling an invisible noose tightening around his family's neck. The desperate question about the identity of the secret enemy mercilessly tore his mind apart from within. In his dimmed eyes reflected a deep primordial horror before the unknown threat looming over the house. No one could comprehend what the hell had started happening in the most powerful martial arts clan. The next morning, the peaceful landscape of the main tower was shattered by a loud rumble from a sudden strike. A fierce dispute erupted in the council hall, where one of the elders openly called the night massacre a vile provocation. The leader of the Blue Sky Sword Unit, Namgun Jun, angrily reminded that their main suspect, Do Hyo Ok, had been in the clan for less than a year. He burst out shouting, convincing those present that Murim would simply laugh at them if they accused the future son-in-law over some scribbles. The other elders sat silently at the long table, tensely listening to this emotional tirade. The calm and thoughtful leader of the free flow unit, Namgun-in, coldly stated that he had a fundamentally different opinion. He rose from his seat and placed a sheet of paper before those present, demanding attention to the 8 symbols left by the killer. His finger pointed to the combination of the hieroglyphs movement and eye, which clearly formed the surname Du, directly indicating the groom. June's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets from such an indisputable and at the same time absurd proof. It reasonably noted that the offender not only easily bypassed the security and demonstratively killed people, but also left a too obvious clue. A sinister shadow fell on his face as he concluded that the enemy's goal was not at all espionage, information gathering, or a quiet murder. Memories of the dazzling beam of light from the previous night confirmed the theory that it was a deliberate, audacious signal before retreat. June struck the table again, categorically refusing to arrest Hyo-ok and thereby destroy the clan's long-standing prestige. He asked in despair how they would look the girl in the eyes if all these accusations turned out to be just a dirty game. The clan leader authoritatively interrupted the dispute, causing the hall to fall silent instantly. Stroking his beard, the elder acknowledged the correctness of both sides. The evidence was suspiciously perfect, but they had no right to ignore it. He reminded the heated warriors that precisely to dispel doubts, 2 elite units had already been sent on reconnaissance. The stern gaze of one of the elders revealed his own inner tension about this mission. Those present confirmed that the scouts of the Heavenly Thunder had already set out in the direction of Hefe. Logic suggested that if the enemy was preparing a large-scale attack on the full moon, their troops should already have been set in motion. The oppressive silence in the spacious waiting hall was broken by a sudden noise from outside. Someone's quick, panicked footsteps echoed along the wooden floor of the corridor. The door slammed open, and a guard rushed into the room shouting about an urgent report. Behind him, the leader of the Heavenly Thunder unit, Namgun-hu, stumbled into the hall, barely standing on his feet. The elders sharply jumped up from their seats, sensing the air filled with the scent of a real catastrophe. The exhausted warrior fell heavily to his knees, his face distorted by a mask of absolute despair. Gasping in horror, he reported that none of the dispatched scouts had returned. June asked confusedly, not believing that an entire elite squad could simply vanish without a trace. Somewhere on the pier, a lone warrior stared into the dark waters, realizing that the designated waiting time had long passed. The clan head gripped Hu's shoulder with a deathly grip, harshly demanding an explanation for this disappearance. The scout raised to the leader an empty, frightened look of a man who had stared into death itself. Hu lowered his head into the shadow, gathering his last strength to pronounce the deadly verdict on their entire lineage. The endless army of enemies surrounded the Namgun fortress in a tight ring, cutting off all routes to salvation. June fiercely denied, shouting that in all Manhwa there simply was no force with such an unprecedented number of people. The clan head grabbed his forehead, suddenly remembering the terrible threat of the 18 river strongholds of the Yangtze. Memories of the mercenary flotilla confirmed the worst. The waterways were controlled by the enemy's allies, and the land routes were completely blocked. June continued to shout, refusing to believe in the existence of such a gigantic shadow organization. However, Namgun-in turned pale and bowed his head, for the realization of the bitter truth paralyzed his will. Covered in cold sweat, In whispered that in all Murim there was only one faction capable of gathering enough strength for a full siege of their mighty clan. Under the stormy sky stood the castle of the heavenly demon, illuminated by flashes of lightning. A solitary figure approached the majestic stairs, mentally prophesying the emperor's fall during the full moon and his own ascent to the throne. The young man confidently looked at the castle, awaiting his time. A predatory smile played on his face, full of unwavering determination to become the new ruler. The next morning, the sunlit courtyards of the residence breathed a deceptive calm. The youth focused, concentrating a glowing ball of energy in his palms during training. He closed his eyes, letting pulsating streams of power flow through his body. A sudden lunge forward raised a cloud of dust. A memory of a devastating sword strike flashed instantly in his mind. Two shadows met in a deadly dance, sparking dazzling sparks from the clashing blades. The enemy fiercely pressed on, forcing the youth to fend off a barrage of lightning-fast attacks. The boy's eyes widened in shock as he realized the full power of his opponent. Waiting for the perfect moment, the enemy unleashed a powerful energy charge. The youth was thrown backward by the explosive wave, losing his balance. With the glowing sword clenched in his hands, he barely held on, realizing he had just been one step from death. Analyzing the fight, he understood that the timely use of the opponent's heavenly wind technique would have been fatal. The memory of the mutilated giant proved the terrible superiority of true martial arts over ordinary gaming skills. The thirst for power flared up with new strength, forcing him to strive to master this destructive power. A whirl of dazzling energy tore through space in his imagination. The enemy silhouette was helplessly thrown back in flashes of lightning. Deadly beams pierced the opponent's body. The shock waves shattered against the stone walls, accompanied by thunder. The victor stood over the enemy's body, wrapped in electric discharges. The young man exhaled with relief, amazed at how the mental simulation of battle granted him a new level of enlightenment. He shifted his gaze to his hand, feeling the residual pulsation from the temporary pressure points. The physical awareness of power was etched into the body, giving confidence in the ability to apply martial arts in reality. He raised his head, sensing changes in the surrounding space. A system panel appeared before his eyes, notifying him of reaching the 13th level and unlocking a quest to change class. The task required destroying 100 enemies of the 10th level to obtain an exclusive title. Crossing his arms on his chest, the hero thoughtfully studied the conditions of the trial. The scale of the task seemed too burdensome to him. He recalled yesterday's opponents, assessing their level no higher than 15th. No sooner had he thought about the difficulty of the mission than a powerful explosion shattered the silence, shaking the castle. Someone's footsteps confidently approached along the stone slabs. The stranger with hair tied in a ponytail smiled faintly. He indifferently surveyed the cracked courtyard filled with bustling armed guards. His face radiated confidence and hidden calculation. The man calmly moved through the crowd of guards. He mentally noted the increased security after the recent outbreak, planning to immediately report to his associates. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp call. The path was blocked by the unit commander. The leader of the guards suspiciously inquired about the reason for such haste. The stranger tensed internally, not understanding why the commander was here right now. A false calming smile instantly played on his lips. He politely lied that he just wanted to check the source of the bright light, which was mistaken for a wedding blessing. The commander did not believe a single word, dryly asking again about the results of the inspection. His gaze became hard and piercing, demanding the truth. The stranger's eyes gleamed ominously in the shadow. The guards instantly lined up in battle formation. Their palms synchronously rested on the hilts of their swords, ready to draw steel. The suspect's face hid in the shadow, leaving only a creepy line of lips visible. The commander unequivocally ordered to escort him to the royal hall for interrogation. The guards began to tighten the circle, cutting off retreat paths. The stranger's eyes flashed with bloody red light, revealing his demonic nature. The commander froze, instinctively sensing the approach of inevitable death. The creature's face twisted into a mad grin, and a long tongue hung out of its mouth as it whined in disappointment over the loss of convenient camouflage. The space tore apart with a fiery storm, scattering the guards like toys. The commander panicked, realizing that the monster's true target was the ruler's residence. The monster unleashed blinding energy, preparing for a devastating attack. The name of the destructive technique hung in the air, the art of the Thunderblade. With a maniacal cackle, the creature concentrated the power of lightning in its hands. Relentless golden beams of energy pierced the space, sweeping away everything in their path. The first form of the technique shattered the ground, leaving deep furrows behind. Electric discharges melted the stone, forming a scorched crater around the monster. From a bird's-eye view, the courtyard of the residence turned into a ruined battlefield. The surviving guards watched the unfolding disaster with unspeakable horror. Amid smoke and debris emerged a young man in a blue uniform, causing witnesses to freeze in horror and confusion as to why the young Master Du orchestrated this massacre. The wounded veteran with scars coughed up dark red blood, shuddering from hellish pain. He weakly sank to the cracked ground, convulsively gasping for air. The realization of the catastrophe struck him. His elite squad of swordsmen was wiped out to dust with a single blow despite the sudden attack. The enemy master, enveloped in a dazzling golden aura, relentlessly strode through the ruins like the embodiment of death itself. Two surviving fighters froze in place, staring with animal fear at the back of the merciless killer. One of them pointed forward with a trembling hand, breaking into a hysterical scream. The other rushed headlong at the young Master Du, desperately shouting to stop this madness. He extended his hand, begging to cease the slaughter, but his words were forever cut off mid-sentence. The attacker swiftly swung his blade, cutting two men in half under a thick fountain of blood. The severed head, with eyes wide in terror, rolled right under the feet of the paralyzed crowd. The wounded veteran, clutching the wound on his chest, croaked a demand to confess who truly hides behind the mask of Do Hyuk. The response was only a dazzling white flash that instantly engulfed the space. The enemy's face twisted into a demonic smile. Clutching the sparkling blade, he mentally mocked the naive question. A colossal pillar of golden lightning struck from the sky, tearing the courtyard to pieces. The veteran found himself at the epicenter of the explosion, and his eyes widened with absolute animalistic terror before death. In the last moment of life, he only managed to curse this merciless bastard. Suddenly, the air was torn by a dark green aura. An elderly master with shining eyes burst into the battle, authoritatively pointing at the audacious one. The old man blocked the deadly lightning strike barehanded, demonstrating terrible power. His face contorted with rage as he sternly asked what exactly the attacker thought he was allowed to do. Golden and green energies collided in a destructive confrontation, grinding the stone slabs into sand. Thrown back by the blast wave, the veteran recognized with relief in his savior the legendary Tan Wu. Nearby, behind the slaughterhouse, a young man with crimson eyes coldly observed, for whom the old man's intervention was completely expected. The energetic conflict of the two elements ended with a colossal explosion that scattered debris for tens of meters. Tanyu stood motionless, like a rock, shielding the wounded ally with his back. The veteran settled near the breached wall, bowed his head, thanking the master of the poisonous hand with his last strength. The old man gloomily turned away from him, bitterly stating that the world of Murim had become too cold. From the thick dust, the attacker emerged again. His body was enveloped in a black, spiked aura, and his voice cynically reproached the relatives for the stab in the back. His face twisted into a wide, madman smile. With a half-naked, scarred torso, he spread his arms, rhetorically asking if not everyone in Jianghu acts just as treacherously. Another fiery explosion shook the opposite end of the residence, causing the crimson-eyed youth to shift his gaze. Around Tanyu, a deadly whirl of poisonous needles spun, as the old man issued an ultimatum to reveal his identity. The golden-haired assassin confidently snorted, recognizing the secret art of the butterfly, and hinted that he would gladly accept a fight. However, the crimson-eyed witness instantly deciphered the enemy's intentions. This bastard planned to escape. The youth tensed, realizing that the attacker had not come here alone for no reason. All this time, he had been searching for something. Suddenly, a girl in green peeked beside him, confusedly asking what her grandfather was doing there. The young man's eyes widened in shock. The assassin's target from the very beginning was Manhwa. A predatory smile spread across his face as all the pieces of the puzzle came together. The enemy jumped high, leaving a trail of black and gold lightning, and triumphantly shouted that he had found his prey. Tanwu launched a hail of needles with furious rage, shouting at the opponent, but he only grinned maniacally, diving straight at the girl. A green whirl of energy rushed after him, desperately trying to intercept the destructive blow. Tanhua froze as a dazzling golden flash covered her shelter. A pure, paralyzing horror before inevitable death froze on her face. The wall shattered into pieces under the incredible pressure of the lightning-fast attack. The courtyard turned into a complete ruin, shrouded in thick, impenetrable smoke. Tanwu's eye twitched nervously, and his heart clenched with unbearable fear for his granddaughter. The desperate old man turned around, shouting Tansam's name desperately, and saw him with the unconscious girl in his arms. The crimson-eyed Tansam calmly held the rescued Tanhua while the grandfather asked about her condition with relief. The wounded veteran weakly stretched out his hand, realizing that the girl had survived. Tanyu carefully took the granddaughter into his arms, piercing the mysterious savior with a heavy gaze. A mocking laugh rang out in the air. The old man fiercely raised his eyes to the roof where their enemy was perched. The attacker's face was drowned in shadows, but his eyes burned with absolute demonic madness. He towered against the sky, shrouded in a terrifying aura, forcing Tansam himself to acknowledge his colossal power. The young man squinted, understanding that this opponent was a true master, capable of fighting on equal terms with Tan Yu himself. The attacker boldly addressed the great hero Tan, looking down at them from the height of the ruined roof. His sinister smile stretched from ear to ear as he promised to return very soon, to which the old man responded with a hateful gaze. The enemy sharply pushed off and vanished into the air, fleeing the battlefield. From powerless rage, the old man's eye twitched, and his jaws clenched tightly. The surviving warriors froze in shock, trying to comprehend what kind of monster had just nearly destroyed them all. The silhouette of the fugitive finally dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind a tense silence. The eyes of Tan Sama suddenly flared with a bright crimson, and his lips stretched into a maniacal smile of recognition. The young man remembered this face and realized that this very scoundrel was behind yesterday's pillar of light. And most importantly, it was he who brazenly ruined all his carefully thought-out plans. Two faces divided the space, radiating absolute madness, where the golden gaze collided with the blood-red one. The realization of the enemy conspiracy struck like thunder, confirming the bitter truth that all events had been planned from the very beginning. The opponent, distorted by scars, arching on the edge of the roof, mockingly promised a new meeting. At that very moment, a dazzling pillar of energy thundered through the ground, raising a cloud of dust and debris. The Grey Master caught the wounded girl in his arms, shouting fiercely that he would never allow the bastard to escape. The bloodied girl weakly coughed, barely whispering, and addressed to her grandfather. The old man's eye widened with overwhelming shock and helplessness before the scale of destruction. From above, the shattered courtyard of the residence looked pitiful, forcing the survivors to acknowledge their absolute defeat. Part of the magnificent palace suddenly exploded in flames, turning the symbol of the clan's power into complete ruins. The patriarch of the clan sat helplessly in the middle of the ruins, surrounded by the corpses of his own people, and only laughed bitterly. The king's hall had turned into a crypt, with bodies nailed to the walls, and the leader could not believe that all this was done by only 4. One of the mutilated bodies belonged to the demon Yin Yang, who, according to rumors, should have been dead long ago. The old man painfully realized that every move of the enemy, including the marriage with he, was a cold-bloodedly calculated trap. Enemy falcons killed all the carrier pigeons, completely destroying the defensive formation and trapping the Namgun clan with no way out. A lone figure limped into the half-ruined pavilion. Leaning on a cane, the mutilated advisor interrupted the patriarch's thoughts, cautiously asking for permission to speak. Raising 2 fingers, he coldly stated that there were only 3 options: fight, flee, or call for help. The patriarch instantly rejected the first 2 as impossible, ordering to proceed with the plan involving a messenger to the Murim alliance. With a heavy sigh, the old man admitted the hopelessness of the idea, not understanding who could possibly break such a tight siege. The advisor confidently raised a finger, declaring that there was a single master of movements capable of this suicidal task. This savior turned out to be the stern gray-haired Elder Tang, whose authority was beyond doubt. The patriarch doubted, believing that even the legendary fighter could not single-handedly defeat an army of enemies. The advisor's face darkened in a silent, heavy pause. The man with the stick grimly voiced his ruthless plan, suggesting the use of a human shield. Hundreds of frightened wedding guests begging for rescue were to become the bargaining chips to distract the enemy. Meanwhile, the night calm and full moon over the lake sharply contrasted with the bloody intrigues in the residence. In a secret room, key figures gathered, where the patriarch tensed due to the presence of an unfamiliar black-haired youth. Elder Tan sharply cut off doubts, guaranteeing the reliability of the boy to whom he personally gave the surname of his clan. The patriarch humbly lowered his gaze, acknowledging the undeniable authority of his interlocutor. He bowed his head low, touching his forehead to the floor in a gesture of absolute despair and submission. Raising his gaze, the clan leader begged the elder to lead the guests to Lake Soho and bring reinforcements. Tan clicked his tongue irritably, fully understanding that the enemy's furious power would simply slaughter most of the fugitives. The patriarch again pressed to the floor, agreeing with the bitter truth but having no other choice. He detailed the rescue route. The boats were to take them to the Yangtze River to seek help from the 18 water fortresses. Hundreds of frightened guests and servants were already waiting near the southern gates under the torchlight, ready for immediate departure. To the cold question about the departure time, the patriarch categorically replied, "They must leave immediately today." The elder closed his eyes, weighing all the fatal risks of this mission for a moment. He decisively stood up, casting aside hesitation, and headed to the exit to prepare for the breakthrough. The patriarch stopped him at the threshold, having one last, deeply personal request. With pain in his voice, he begged to take he with him so that the girl would not see his inevitable duel with the monster. Tan paused for a moment, casting a gloomy, piercing glance over his shoulder. The patriarch's eyes filled with horror as he asked if this was truly the absolute end for their great clan. The black space seemed to swallow the words of despair about the inevitable destruction of the Namgun clan. The patriarch wept on the floor, confessing his fear and certainty that they would not last even 10 days. The elder exploded with devastating fury, angrily calling the leader a mad freak for his weakness. His eye flashed with demonic green light, reinforcing the Poison Lord's vow never to let the clan fall. He grimly ordered to hold on to life at any cost, promising to return with an army while he wept, calling for her grandfather. The black-haired youth silently watched this dramatic farewell, coldly noting every detail. Later, he stood alone on the rocky shore under the moon, mentally rejoicing that he managed to save Manhwa. The youth analyzed what he heard. Although he learned the clan's plans firsthand, the strategy had too many weak points. His detached gaze slid over the illuminated residence, which was soon to turn into a real bloodbath. Meanwhile, Manhwa panicked and grabbed her head, trying to comprehend her grandfather's suicidal intentions. Suddenly, something caught her attention, and the girl's eyes widened in surprise. Her cheeks instantly flushed with a deep blush, accompanied by a quiet, embarrassed exclamation. The wind played with her hair as she stood next to the savior in awkward silence under the full moon's glow. Manhwa nervously turned away, crossing her arms over her chest while the boy continued to maintain a stone-cold calm. The girl was sweating from inner tension, mentally complaining about the absolute impossibility of reading her companion's emotions. In the deep, dark eyes of the young man, a shadow of hidden intentions and cold calculation flashed for a moment. Gathering courage, she lowered her gaze and quietly thanked the mysterious boy for saving her life. The young man cut her off coldly, telling her not to harbor illusions, stating that he had simply used his only chance to end the conversation and flared with a sinister aura. Far away, a white-haired man stood alone on the shore, silently watching the burning city in the middle of the water. He slowly turned around, noticing in the shadows of the forest a threatening muscular silhouette holding a severed head in his hand. The white-haired man's eye instantly narrowed, recognizing in the night visitor the ruthless killer known as Shadow, the Shifter. The scarred giant emerged from the darkness with a sinister smile, offering to be called by his real name, Duhayo Oak. In the night darkness, Ashen Shadow coldly asked his scarred, mutilated interlocutor whether he would hear any excuse this time. He harshly reminded that 4 of their comrades had died in vain, and the very presence of the partner here meant the complete failure of the first strategy. However, the grotesque man confidently objected, stating that the main goal of the plan was to make him a hero of the righteous faction. His eyes flashed with a predatory yellow light as he ominously added that even now he had not lost the chance to gain this status. Suddenly, he transformed into a half-naked woman and, smiling playfully, asked how Ashen Shadow liked this appearance. The creature's thoughts flew further. In this ideal form, the need for the real Namgunhai finally disappeared. Ashen Shadow stared at him in shock, instantly recognizing the flawless appearance of Lady Namgunhai. Understanding the scale of the plan, he burst into maniacal laughter, acknowledging his partner as insane, whose plan was now changing absolutely everything. However, his sinister joy quickly turned into a lustful smile. Without hiding his excitement, the white-haired man admitted that this form, worthy of the title of Anhui's first beauty, aroused desire in him, despite the true gender of the interlocutor. Hearing this, the creature instantly lost its female form, its face distorted with rage and its eyes were again flooded with demonic light. Ashen Shadow only laughed, declaring that he did not care about gender, and a fierce clash immediately erupted between them, illuminating the shore with a dazzling explosion of energy. Suddenly, their duel was interrupted by the piercing cry of a hawk swiftly descending from the night sky. Stopping the fight, Ashen Shadow calmly accepted the bird on his hand, recognizing it as a messenger from Water Shadow. Unrolling a scroll with a single hieroglyph, he contentedly stated that the ships had already set off. Waving his hand, he released the hawk and indifferently told his partner that it was time to move. The werewolf in female form smiled slyly, grabbing a feather, and declared that she would follow the bird. Ashen Shadow asked in surprise why go to Water Shadow if a visit to the Namgun clan promises much more entertainment, but received the answer that there is something more interesting on the water. He waved dismissively, assuming it was about Tan Wu, who, despite his status as one of the 10 greats, could not compare in importance to an entire clan. Suddenly, the white-eyed man's eyes widened as he realized the true reason. Illuminated by a guess, he abruptly stretched out his hand and shouted a question about the mysterious light and the person behind it. The creature only laughed mockingly and, using shadow displacement, dissolved into the darkness, leaving Ashen Shadow grasping at air in vain. Left in complete solitude on the empty shore, the man could only silently watch the vanished ally. Meanwhile, above the calm waters of the river, the full moon shone brightly, illuminating the path of the lone sailboat. The night silence was broken by a large movement. A huge flotilla of warships confidently moved across the water surface. One of the massive vessels majestically cut through the waves, approaching its unknown destination. On its deck, in tense silence, stood three warriors, a woman, an elderly master, and a young swordsman. Their figures remained motionless, their gazes fixed on the thick fog swirling ahead. Nearby, on the shore, someone's hands tightly gripped a spyglass, carefully tracking the movement of the mysterious flotilla. An experienced scout with a thick beard was convinced by what he saw, and gathering his gear, rushed away into the thicket. He swiftly dashed along the wooden pier past the lined-up guards, hurrying to the main residence. Reaching the terrace, the warrior knelt down and reported to his leader the confirmation of the information. The supreme leader of the 18 water fortresses of the Yangtze River cold-bloodedly commanded to prepare to go out on the water. On the deck of the main ship, three warriors continued to peer into the dense mist from which other vessels were approaching. The young swordsman felt something was wrong, mentally running through the worst scenarios of the upcoming battle. His eye narrowed with tension as he soberly assessed the chances even of such an outstanding expert as Tang Wu. The gray-haired master continued to stand motionless by the side, unaware that the youth considered them and the woman only a burden. The boy's imagination was engulfed by the flame of deadly danger, where the fate of three was being decided: Tanghua, Namgunhye, and Tang Sama. His thoughts were merciless. If at a critical moment someone had to be abandoned, the choice would be obvious. He had no illusions and clearly understood that he would be the one sacrificed. Clenching his face with his hand, the youth desperately tried to suppress fear and find a way out. The inner voice suggested to him only one solution: to prepare for the worst in advance. The ship armada relentlessly cut through the dark waves, delving into the increasingly dense fog. The gray-haired master anxiously noted that a dead silence prevailed around, and they had not yet encountered a single enemy. His face darkened, for the force capable of besieging the Namgun clan found such a lack of resistance extremely suspicious. Unwilling to take risks, he ordered his companion to reduce the ship's speed to the minimum. The flotilla slowed down, cautiously advancing through the impenetrable veil of river mist. Suddenly, one of the sailors on the deck was stunned, noticing something ahead. Through the haze, dim, ominous lights of unknown vessels began to break through. The sailor shouted, pointing his hand at the cluster of lights, causing shock in the elderly warrior. From the fog emerged giant sails with black dragons, emblems of a powerful river faction. The deck erupted with joyful cries. The crew decided that this was reinforcements responding to the Namgun clan's call. People wept with happiness, raising their hands to the sky and praising their salvation. The Grey Master, with hope in his voice, guessed that the 18 water fortresses had indeed come to help, as promised. However, with each passing second, his face paled and cold sweat appeared on his forehead as he assessed the scale of the flotilla. Dozens of warships lined up in a solid wall, completely blocking the river with a fiery barrier. A troubling question flashed through the master's mind about why the Allies needed such an incredible number of vessels. Two armadas approached closely, and their threatening battle formation became obvious. A terrible suspicion struck like lightning. They were not going to help. They were blocking the way. The master tensed, piecing the puzzle together. The suspicious absence of enemies was only a trap to drive them straight into this blockade. Raising his voice, he shouted frantically that these were not reinforcements and ordered the ships to turn around immediately. His face twisted with rage and despair, his eyes burning with the madness of a cornered beast. The huge enemy flotilla on the horizon left no chance for a breakthrough, forcing the master to shout for an immediate retreat. In panic, he turned to his team and, breaking into a shout, repeated the order to turn the ships around, finally realizing they had fallen into a deadly trap. A woman with a massive stature stood still on the deck, gazing through the night mist at the enemy ships. She stood majestically before her army, while archers with drawn bows lined up on the wall behind her. At her sharp order to open fire, the old master and the young man tensely watched the beginning of the attack. The sky instantly ignited as thousands of fiery arrows rained down on the enemy fleet. The old man shouted in despair, trying to avoid the deadly hail that pierced the deck around them. Burning shells mercilessly pierced the warriors, turning the ship into a complete hell. A sudden explosion of massive green energy forced the young man to sharply raise his block, saving himself from the blow. The giant burning mass collapsed with a terrible roar right where he had just stood. The old man burst out shouting, ordering the survivors to gather and immediately turn the ship around. He sharply looked back, feeling the situation rapidly slipping out of control. The firestorm did not subside, turning enemy squadrons into ashes sinking into the sea abyss. The girl asked the old man in panic what they should do, realizing the enemy had trapped them on both sides. The old man cursed through his teeth, pointing with his hand to the shore as the only way to salvation. His face contorted with tension as he ordered to immediately transfer everyone still standing there. The wooden structure of the ship shattered into splinters under the devastating blow. Someone's silhouette flashed like lightning in the air, cutting through the night darkness. A devastating blow fell upon the enemies, leaving behind only bloody splashes. On the burning deck, a chaotic slaughter erupted, where everyone fought for their own survival. The female commander smiled eerily through the blood, giving a cruel order to destroy every single one. The young man, the old man, and the girl found themselves in the middle of a ring of fire, assessing their meager chances. The old master bared his sharp teeth, barely restraining his rage from the hopelessness. The young man moved forward, cold-bloodedly, while a mysterious green aura began to concentrate in his hand. The girl reacted instantly, throwing an energy whip at the old man to pull him out of the line of fire. She fell to her knees, catching the weakened master. The girl, in despair, rushed to him, begging him to explain what he had planned. The master strictly cut off, saying that they must reach the shore at any cost. The girl protested, understanding that he would not have the strength to carry all three, to which the old man harshly replied that he would take only two. She froze in shock, realizing the terrible meaning of his words. Her gaze painfully shifted to the back of the young man, who remained standing in the epicenter of the fire. The old man decisively lifted her onto his shoulder, leaving Tansama to fend for himself. The girl, with despair on her face, tried to object, reaching out to the abandoned ally. The master mentally admitted his own weakness, surprised that he had grown attached to this child. His eye ominously flashed with green light as he mentally stated that he would not kill the boy, but would not save him either. The girl screamed as the old man pushed off the burning side with a powerful jerk. Her face was hidden behind strands of hair, completely surrendering to the cruel fate. Standing on the edge of death, the old man addressed the abandoned young man one last time, calling him by name. He proudly declared that the Tan clan might not know of his existence, but he, poise in his hand, would remember him forever. Leaving behind a trail of green energy, the master made a desperate leap into the darkness. The girl quietly shed a tear, resigning herself to the inevitable loss. Tansam was left completely alone, and behind him a real fiery hell opened up. The boy smiled fiercely, quietly noting that without extra eyes he could finally act to the fullest. The enemy warrior tried to attack from behind, but the youth's blade already flared with a blue aura. Tansam turned lightning fast, unleashing destructive power straight into the attacker's face. A devastating strike split the enemy in half, leaving only a bloody trail in the air. The youth whistled a melody carefreely, holding the severed head of the opponent in his hand. He cold-bloodedly dragged the mangled corpse through the fire, like a predator playing with its prey. Bloody reflections played on his face as he gleefully licked the blood from the blade's edge. Around, the remnants of the fleet were burning out, plunging the sea into eerie silence. The leader of the enemy squad stopped over the corpses, ordering his men to leave no one alive. Heavy steps of the young man echoed across the burning deck, attracting the attention of the killers. One of the bald mercenaries suspiciously turned at the sound. He mockingly asked the bloodied silhouette if he was all right. Tansam raised his head, and his face stretched into a demonic smile, coldly confirming that he was perfectly fine. Under the cold moonlight, the remains of the ship continued to slowly sink into the water. Suddenly, a powerful flash of green energy tore through the space above the water, reaching toward the shore. The old master's eyes widened in horror as he realized the scale of the ambush. The shoreline was found to be littered with lights, cutting off any path of retreat. In the darkness of the forest, a whole army of the demonic castle awaited them, ready for destruction. The old man panicked as he realized that the enemy had prudently hidden the main forces on land. A giant eye of green energy opened above the battlefield, unleashing devastating magic. Deadly whips pierced the air, mercilessly tearing apart everyone who stood in their way. The master's face drowned in a green glow as he used his last reserves of strength. At dawn, the waves gently washed over the corpses thrown onto the cold sand near the smoldering wreckage. The girl with an empty gaze sank to her knees beside the lifeless body of the old man, realizing that their escape had turned into a complete failure. The unknown man in a hood hurriedly commanded to move, hiding his face in the shadows. The young man stood motionless among the mangled bodies on the deck, completely engulfed in hellish flames. Blood ran down his face as he sharply turned his head, indifferently assessing the consequences of his own massacre. A system window appeared before his eyes, coldly recording 18 killed enemies out of the 100 required for a class upgrade. The hero coldly glanced over the corpses, mentally pondering whether these sacrifices met the harsh conditions of the quest. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a loud shout from an ally against the backdrop of a wall of fire. The man was horrified by the sight of the young man and ordered to immediately hide the gruesome face so as not to attract unnecessary attention. The crimson, blood-stained features and the demonic glow of the hero's eyes could instill primal fear in anyone. Realizing his mistake, the young man silently agreed and began diligently wrapping his head with tight bandages. A burly man arrived at the site of the bloody massacre, ironically assessing the scale of the destruction while the remains of the ship were still burning. Stroking his thick beard, the giant smiled and stated that his men had turned the harbor into a true sea of blood. The surviving pirates instantly fell to their knees, respectfully greeting the deputy leader. The giant demanded a report, and his subordinates reported a complete clearing of the ships, warning that Tan Wu with a handful of masters had managed to escape to shore. The leader only thoughtfully scratched the back of his head and ordered to wait for further instructions to coordinate with the leader. The pirates obediently bowed their heads, waiting for orders amid the raging fire. From the darkness behind them, a single crimson eye watched intently, hidden behind a layer of dirty bandages. Above the burning harbor, the flagship ship majestically towered with an image of a mystical dragon on its sails. On the deck stood a female warrior with a heavy mace, silently watching the flames. A bearded giant slowly approached her, noting the tardiness of the fickle shadow. The woman was not at all surprised by his appearance, which made the leader slyly squint and ask about the source of her information. She calmly replied that the ashen shadow had warned her in advance about the reinforcements. The giant laughed sincerely, noticing that the interlocutor's signature smile remained unchanged, regardless of the gender she chose for disguise. The changeable shadow coldly accepted the compliment, promising to remember these words. The next moment drowned in absolute emptiness, emphasizing the ominous silence before the new storm. A predatory smile spread across the woman's face as she confirmed the plan to drive the target to Mount Sanjin, turning it into a mass grave. The leader grinned sinisterly, imagining their victim desperately climbing up, unaware of the trap. The woman gripped the handle of the massive weapon tighter and gave a brief order to prepare for departure. Her silhouette loomed menacingly against the backdrop of the fire as she announced the dispatch of the remaining forces for the hunt. The bearded man confidently estimated that a battle of one of the 10 greats against 2 shadows might even require the intervention of a third. However, he quickly dismissed doubts and resolutely moved forward, emphasizing the necessity of absolute confidence in victory. His heavy steps abruptly stopped on the wooden deck. The woman, without turning, called him by his real name, Water Shadow. She inquired whether he had encountered a strange warrior with black eyes or a master whose techniques radiate light. Water Shadow dryly replied that he had not seen anyone like that. His face was covered with a gloomy veil of thoughts about the unexpected question. All retreat paths were securely blocked, but the mysterious swordsman still disappeared without a trace. Turning his back to the fire, Water Shadow plunged into his own bloody fantasies. A terrifying green light flashed in his eye, and a maniacal smile played on his lips. A single truth flashed through his consciousness. There is no problem that total slaughter would not solve. Far from the burning shore, under the cover of night, towering impregnable rocky mountains rose. Through the dense thickets of the forest, a squad of fugitives moved silently, hiding in the shadows. The silence was broken by the clang of metal. Enemy assassins attacked the squad from an ambush. A blinding flash of green energy cut through the space, piercing the darkness like a blade. The old master unleashed his deadly aura, preparing to tear the attackers apart alone. The green threads of his technique mercilessly tore the enemies one by one. When the last shadow fell dead, the leader of the fugitives, Tan Wu, heavily leaned on his sword among the corpses. His face, furrowed with wrinkles, was covered with cold sweat from exhaustion. Not allowing the people to catch their breath, the old man gave a harsh order to continue moving. But something deep in the forest caught his gaze, causing his eyes to widen with anxiety. Behind him, the fighters barely stood on their feet, weakly sinking to the ground under the weight of their wounds. Realizing that the limit of endurance had been passed, Tanwu irritably cursed through clenched teeth. Crushing his heart, he shouted to the remainder of the squad to stop for a rest. The warriors broke into small groups in the dimly lit clearing, vainly trying to regain strength. The old man grimly analyzed the losses, realizing that barely half remained of his elite Black Raven unit. The promised reinforcements vanished without a trace, and the chances of survival melted with every minute. Overcome with despair, Tanwu grabbed his head, understanding the necessity to return to his clan at all costs. The rest ended abruptly. The old man drew his blade and roared, raising the exhausted people for a new battle. He took a combat stance and shouted fiercely into the impenetrable thicket, demanding the enemy reveal themselves. In response, only the ominous rustling of leaves approaching from all sides was heard. From the darkness of the trees, the silhouette of a young man with a bandaged face and a sword at the ready slowly emerged. The nerves of one of the Black Raven warriors gave out and he panicked, shouting about a pirate attack. Demonic eyes flashed from beneath the bloody bandages, and the young man mockingly and eerily greeted his new victims. The squad instantly reformed, surrounding the lone figure with a tight ring of blades amid the cold darkness. Wasting not a second, the mad pirates charged with a bloodthirsty roar, aiming to slaughter everyone to the last. The gray-haired warrior rushed into battle, desperately urging his men to survive and return to the Danri clan. The battlefield instantly turned into a brutal meat grinder, where mercenaries desperately crossed blades. Suddenly, an unknown figure burst into the very center of the clash, raising a powerful shockwave with their landing. The clash of weapons caused a dazzling flash of blue energy that tore through the darkness. The force of the impact was so destructive that a massive explosion shook the ground beneath the warrior's feet. Feeling the limit of his physical capabilities, the gray-haired master mentally decided to end the fight with one swift strike. His sword instantly ignited with a concentrated blue aura. He applied the style of the 10 swords of the single flow, putting all remaining strength into his lunge. A giant blade of blue energy with devastating power crashed down on the opponent. In response, the technique of the 10 consecutive swords of the flying swallow sounded out. A storm of rapid blue strokes formed an impenetrable dome, perfectly blocking the old man's destructive attack. A short but extremely tense moment of absolute silence ensued. From beneath the enemy's bandages flashed a crimson eye, filled with demonic concentration and a thirst for murder. The Dark Warrior cold-bloodedly realized that he had completely figured out the trajectory of the enemy's sword. Gathering his own aura, he swiftly rushed into a counterattack against the backdrop of the fading blue glow. The clan master angrily swung, shouting that he would not be fooled by such pathetic tricks. But the opponent dodged the deadly lunge with an incredible pirouette. The blue blade, with a deafening crack, plunged into the ground, raising a column of dust and blood. From the force of the blow, both warriors flew apart, increasing the distance under the night sky. The Dark Assassin instantly regrouped, activating the technique of the Sword of Three Powers. The old man's eyes flared with blue fire, and he launched a furious attack from above. Confident in his triumph, he joyfully exclaimed that the enemy was exposed and struck. But his face suddenly twisted in shock as a foreign blade unexpectedly pierced his chest. The old man staggered and shuddered, unable to comprehend how such a thing could happen at all. Only one thought beat in his head. He was absolutely sure he had delivered the perfect strike. The bandaged warrior calmly raised the dagger, noting that in a deadly fight, the one who hides more aces wins. His cold gaze left no illusions about the outcome of this battle. The master asked in amazement if one hidden dagger was all he had prepared, but suddenly froze, recognizing the enemy's gaze. He realized with horror that he had seen those dreadful eyes before. Meanwhile, the killer raised his hand, and ghostly blades materialized in the air around him. One of the daggers with a piercing whistle tore from its place. In a moment, a whole rain of shining blades rushed straight at the wounded old man. He desperately swung his sword, barely defending himself under the relentless hail of magical strikes. His eyes widened in horror. The enemy had been summoning weapons literally from the air all this time. Wrapped in a dark aura, the killer continued his rush, leaving the old man to wonder what kind of black magic this was. Suddenly, the master looked back at a new threat that had appeared behind him. Two mercenaries emerged from the darkness with shouts, trying to finish him off with a surprise attack. Trapped in a dead end, the old man realized in panic that he was being squeezed from both sides. A hostile blade treacherously tore open his back, leaving behind a massive bloody trail. But at that very moment, the bandaged warrior flared with a crimson aura and ominously ordered the mercenaries not to interfere with his hunt. The old man's face paled, turning into a mask of absolute animal horror. The puzzle finally came together. He clearly remembered exactly to whom these eyes belonged. Shuddering, he stared fixedly at the back of his most terrible nightmare. A hoarse curse burst from his lips. He finally recognized in him the very scoundrel from the Dronzer clan. Rage instantly mixed with panic, causing the master to let out a frenzied battle cry. The killer rushed at him from above like a demon, mockingly asking how such a miserable worm dared to open his mouth. Their blades clashed again with sparks as the old man shouted, demanding to know when all this began. Desperately defending himself, the master continued to shout, not understanding how long he had been deceived. The killer's blade whistled millimeters from his face, reflecting the crimson glow of the eye on the steel. A brutal and uncompromising close-quarters fight began, where crossed swords struck lightning. The old man put all his rage into the attack, directly calling his opponent a demon. Clenching his teeth, he accused him of being responsible for the bloody plague of suicides in Bongyan as well. The metals clanged with renewed force, striking a powerful flash of sparks. The bandaged warrior cold-bloodedly and smoothly parried the enemy's next attack. Ducking under the old man's sword, he reminded him that he was merely a horse manure cleaner in the noble clan. Suddenly, a hidden mechanism clicked in the assassin's hand, releasing a deadly segmented chain. The steel whip made a lightning-fast circle, and with a clean cut severed the old man's arm, flooding the ground with a fountain of blood. The master's eyes froze in shock from unbearable pain, looking at his own severed limb. Using the last crumbs of his life force, he flared with a dazzling red aura for a desperate final surge. But the body finally gave out. Bleeding profusely, he staggered and croaked that he needed to return to the clan. Watching the fallen enemy, the assassin only coldly repeated his rule about the advantage of the one who hides their strength. The night forest finally fell silent, turning into a cemetery strewn with soldiers' corpses. The last surviving mercenary panicked, looking around, cursing everything in the world, and begging for reinforcements. The Dark Warrior recalled the words that from a certain point reinforcements really stopped arriving. Leaving the battlefield, he decided that there must be a significant reason for this, which needed to be checked immediately. The pirate's face grimaced in a predatory smile as he triumphantly informed his men that the long-awaited targets had finally arrived. From the depths of the forest, a silhouette silently watched the torch-bearing newcomers, irritably noting the incredible slowness of the leadership. In the darkness, the figures of thugs loomed threateningly, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. The wounded man with a bandaged face and his elder companion tensely studied the crowd, wondering why they had turned their clothes inside out. Suddenly, a panicked scream rang out from one of the pirates in the darkness, calling for the Citadel's leader. The old man only managed to indignantly ask the reason for the delay when a lightning-fast blade strike cut through the space. A bloody fountain shot into the sky. The old man's head flew off his shoulders, accompanied by splashes of arterial blood. Hot droplets sprinkled the faces of the shocked witnesses, paralyzing them with absolute horror. From the forest thicket emerged a female figure with a long sword, radiating an aura of inevitable death. Her bloodied face spread into a sadistic smile as she gave the merciless order to slaughter absolutely everyone. Meanwhile, above the night forest, a mountain peak rose ominously, shrouded in thick fog. The clearing instantly turned into a meat grinder, where dozens of chopped bodies fell into the mud under the clang of steel. One of the surviving grandfathers crawled back in panic, helplessly twitching his legs before his executioner. Tears and sweat rolled down his dirty face as he pitifully begged to spare his life. In his eyes, widened with horror, a single question froze. Why did their own suddenly start this massacre? However, the executioner himself was barely holding on. The young swordsman burst into a desperate scream, confessing that he could no longer continue this madness. He shouted about the impossibility of killing his own comrades, but his words were cut off by a swift attack from behind. The air was again sliced by crimson arcs, mercilessly tearing the rebels' bodies into bloody pieces. The leaderess, with a wild grimace, shouted that she would personally smash the skull of anyone who dared to retreat even a step. This cruelty finally broke the will of the rest. Huge men froze with faces twisted by animal fear. The order to leave no one alive drowned in the sounds of cracking bones as another blade split the victim's skull in half. The bloodless body thudded dully to the ground, flooding the forest path with a fresh puddle. All this time, the bandaged warrior silently watched the bloody slaughter from a secure shelter. Having assessed the situation, he suddenly sprang up like an arrow released from a bow. His silhouette merged with the darkness, turning into a blurred shadow that silently slid between the trees. Through the gaps in the bandages burned a focused gaze that continuously scanned the surrounding danger. The hero instantly dropped to the ground, noticing ahead a long chain of torches blocking the path. The patrol commander fiercely roared the leader's order, demanding not to let a single rat pass through their border. The bandaged warrior cautiously peeked from behind a thick trunk, realizing that the trap was closing from all sides. Two guards intently stared into the darkness, trying to catch the slightest movement. But their reflexes proved insufficient. The hero rushed past them like an elusive black whirlwind. Analyzing the situation on the run, he realized the enemy's cruel tactic. They were slaughtering their own pirates to drive the survivors up the mountain. It was a classic bait hunt, where people were used as helpless game. His only visible eye flashed with an ominous red light in the dense darkness. In his consciousness, the thought was clearly engraved that he had never before been in the role of a victim. The warrior's light steps barely touched the ground, dissolving into the night silence. But ahead loomed a dense wall of enemies who completely blocked the only passage. Suddenly, steel chains emerged from the darkness, causing the sentries to shout about an enemy attack. Deadly whips swiftly swept through the rows of cutthroats, leaving behind a bloody mess of severed limbs. The hero gracefully landed in the epicenter of the slaughter, supporting himself on his hand after a devastating attack. Before his eyes, a holographic system interface unfolded with a quiet squeak, displaying the health bar and the 13th level. Glancing over his stats, he coldly noted that the next level up was very close. While the surviving remnants of the patrol scattered in panic, the warrior slowly raised his blade. His gaze fixed on the direction where the cowards fled, and a new plan formed in his mind. Taking a step forward, he decided to use this crowd of frightened pirates for his own purposes. Meanwhile, on another clearing, a group of exhausted fugitives gathered, among whom stood out a sturdy old man and a girl with short hair. The girl anxiously turned to the old man, asking if he felt the same approaching danger. The gray-haired veteran nodded grimly, confirming that they were being driven into a trap like cattle. He stated that the enemy was deliberately driving them toward the mountain peak, but his thoughts were interrupted by a joyful exclamation from someone in the crowd who recognized him as the great hero Tan. However, the joy instantly faded when the group froze in confusion before an insurmountable obstacle. Their path was abruptly cut off by a deep, dark chasm yawning with a terrifying emptiness. The old man and the frightened girl stared wide-eyed at the edge of the abyss, realizing their hopeless situation. One of the men fell to the ground in despair, whining that now it was the end for all of them. Another hysterically grabbed his head, shouting that he had come only to celebrate a wedding, but instead found his death here. Listening to this pitiful whining, the gray-haired hero Tan fiercely bared his teeth in growing anger. His eye flashed with a poisonous green light as he barked at the whiners, ordering them to be silent. The old man straightened up in all his formidable majesty, indignantly declaring that if even he had not given up, then these young men had no right to hide themselves prematurely. With wild determination, he proclaimed that all they had left was to kill every bastard who dared to climb up here. His devastating gaze made the nearest coward stammer, not daring to contradict the veteran's will. Suddenly, a suspicious rustle came from the bushes, causing the old man to sharply turn his head toward the forest thicket. Tan instantly released steel claws, and the girl nearby drew daggers, preparing for a deadly fight. But instead of enemies, a group of ragged people with raised hands stumbled out of the bushes, begging not to shoot, as they too had become victims of the attack. Behind them, from the impenetrable shadow of the trees, the bandaged figure of the main hero silently emerged. Old Tan and his companion exchanged puzzled glances, not understanding how to interpret the unexpected appearance of the silent warrior. The man, with despair on his face, raised his hands and shouted that they were also fleeing because they had been attacked by the people of the leader of their own stronghold. In the old master's eyes flashed the understanding that an internal conflict had begun within the enemy ranks, giving a perfect chance to break through the encirclement and descend from the mountain. He sternly ordered everyone to clear the way, decisively leading his people downward. Suddenly, from the darkness of the forest came a chilling laugh that made the fugitives abruptly stop. Two unknown men leisurely stepped out of the shadows, openly mocking the group's pitiful attempts to escape. A giant man with a thick beard maliciously compared them to rats trapped in a snare. The old master drew his weapon, tensely demanding the unknown men to state their names. The stranger only smiled slyly, hiding his face under a wide hat. A moment later, he discarded the disguise, revealing his crazy smile and asking if they recognized him now. The old man's face instantly twisted in deep shock at the sight of this enemy. In fury, he shouted the name Du Hai Ok, finally realizing the full seriousness of the trap. The woman with the massive sword on her shoulder coldly ordered her partner to stop talking and deal with the target faster. She impatiently reached for her weapon, leaving bloody marks on her face from previous battles. However, Du Hai Ok with a predatory smile objected, stating there was no need to hurry, since their victim would die today anyway. He calmly and confidently stepped towards Master Tang, mockingly urging him to calm down. The villain added that before the inevitable battle, he wanted to ask about only one trivial matter. He was interested in that miserable piece of trash the old man constantly carried with him. A sinister spark flashed in his eyes as he began interrogating about the current whereabouts of that boy. Du Hai Ok's face was finally distorted by a demonic grimace radiating uncontrollable thirst for blood. Meanwhile, on a distant plateau, another warrior silently watched the group ahead. From beneath his bandages, a cold gaze peered out as he realized that the enemies mercilessly killed even their own allies solely for his pursuit. His eyes suspiciously narrowed from intense thoughts and analysis of the situation. He recalled the dazzling flash of energy that night and understood that his intervention had completely ruined the opponent's plans. The man in bandages chuckled ominously, grasping that he had become the main target of this hunt. Mad joy engulfed his mind, and his wide-open eyes filled with a bloody gleam. At that moment, Du Hai Ok from the other side of the plateau began sharply looking around in all directions. He thoughtfully touched his chin, absolutely convinced that a master capable of such a flash of light could not have simply died. The criminal shouted fiercely into the night darkness, demanding that the coward immediately come out of his hiding place. Clenching his fangs in anger, he threatened cruel retribution if he did not appear by the count of 3. At that very moment, the warrior in bandages dashed forward with incredible speed, leaving behind a whirlwind of bloody strikes. Du Hai Ok's eyes widened predatory as he finally spotted his desired prey. Suddenly, a semi-transparent system screen with status characteristics appeared before the warrior's eyes. The interface blinked and a blinding pillar of energy struck from the sky, tearing the darkness to shreds. Du Hai Ok only managed to cover his face in surprise from this powerful glow. When the light went out, the enemy noted with surprise that his target had suddenly vanished without a trace. He recalled that he only managed to notice a blurred silhouette in the center of the flash, which seemed to deliberately throw itself off the cliff. Thick blood slowly spread along the edge of the cliff, indisputably testifying to someone's rapid fall. Du Hai Ok approached the edge of the abyss, realizing that even such an experienced master could not survive such a jump. He maliciously and at the same time disappointedly assumed that it was an ordinary suicide. Only a group of defenseless people and an unconscious girl lying on the ground remained on the plateau. She moaned quietly, having no strength to get up on her own after all she had been through. The silhouette of the lone enemy loomed threateningly against the night sky over the rest of the frightened fugitives. Du Hai Ok scratched the back of his head irritably, complaining about the unpleasant aftertaste of such an uninteresting ending. However, his face again spread into a sinister smile as he decided to be satisfied with the slaughter of those who remained. 2 women in panic lifted the wounded young master, hastily retreating behind their protector's back. The girl with tears in her eyes asked in despair what all this meant and why they were treating them this way. Du Hai Ok only looked coldly and condescendingly at his helpless victim. In a mocking tone, he asked if the young lady had always been such an idiot, unable to grasp the real danger of the situation. The old Master Tan desperately ordered everyone to retreat, preparing to take the deadly blow himself. The enemy raised his hand with pleasure, giving the order to his accomplices to seize Master Tan. Suddenly, from behind the trees, someone's audacious shout rang out, instantly stopping their advance. Du Hai Ok and his partner froze in surprise, hearing the unexpected order to disperse. One of the henchmen swore discontentedly as a restless movement began in the bandits' crowd. The unknown man irritably repeated his order, roughly and bloodily pushing the enemies aside on his way. From the darkness emerged a bloodied young man with a sly smile, ironically asking if they were going to start the feast without him. Old Tan realized with horror that before him appeared another master of the highest level. The old man's eyes instantly widened in deep shock when he saw what the stranger had brought. The young man with a creepy smile announced that he had brought a gift with him and carelessly threw it to the ground. The girl behind stared fearfully at the unknown object that rolled dully to their feet. The young man, soaked in someone else's blood, theatrically spread his arms, joyfully announcing his terrible surprise. On the cold ground lay the severed, still fresh head of the patriarch of the Namgung clan. Everyone present froze in absolute paralyzing horror, and the thick shadows on their faces emphasized unspeakable despair. The young lady, with a frantic scream, fell to her knees before the gruesome remains of her dearest person. With trembling hands, she carefully lifted the bloodied head of her grandfather, and her eyes became empty from shock. Darkness inexorably thickened over her under the pouring rain, finally engulfing the last remnants of hope. Bowing his head in the darkness, the pale man barely restrained laughter, choking on his own sadistic pleasure. His face was distorted by a creepy smile as quiet giggling turned into outright, mad laughter. Spreading his arms in ecstasy, he openly mocked the first beauty Manhwa, who bitterly wept over the body of her dead grandfather. Looking over the land covered with corpses, the maniac joyfully declared that it was the tear-streaked and broken face of the beautiful woman that aroused him the most. Wiping the blood, he shifted his gaze to his accomplices, sincerely considering this bloody scene witty. However, the muscular woman with the mace and the scarred swordsman silently observed his hysteria with cold condemnation. Feeling the tension, the psychopath looked around confusedly, not understanding why none of them shared his sick enthusiasm. In response, the accomplices dryly cut in that he had completely lost his mind and long ago lost the remnants of humanity. Outraged by such a reaction, the maniac began to gesticulate actively, reminding them that they had just crushed a mighty clan and would soon finish off their main target. Bringing his gruesome face closer, he boasted that he had already taken the heads of 2 masters of the highest rank. The frightened girl froze in horror, upon hearing his promise to take both surviving women as his wives. Suddenly, a grim silhouette appeared in the darkness, from whose hand a powerful green energy began to burst forth. The unknown clenched his fist, and his aura flared with poisonous flames, rapidly dispersing the surrounding darkness. At that very moment, green rays lightning fast pierced the space, lifting the bodies of the survivors into the air with incredible speed. The girl was struck as she recognized in this power her grandfather, when the energy needles firmly pierced their clothing. Emitting a dazzling aura, the old master explained that he had invested half of his life force into the golden needles of the dragon and phoenix. He fully understood that even this colossal energy would not be enough for a safe descent from the steep cliff. Clenching his teeth, the grandfather grimly warned that a harsh fall could permanently cripple their bodies. But, straightening his radiant hand, he firmly declared that the survival of his descendants remained the sole priority. Seeing this sacrificial act, the young man screamed in panic, desperately begging to stop the technique. His voice broke into a hoarse whisper as he painfully shouted the name of the old master from the Sichuan clan Tang. A bloody tear streamed from the warrior's eyes as he fiercely clenched his fist, vowing to one day repay this bloody debt to the enemies. Emerald energy swiftly threw the girl backward, and her desperate scream echoed through the night darkness. The young man grabbed his head, bursting into a frantic wail upon realizing the inevitable loss. The enraged villain instantly lunged forward, releasing pink energy blades and cursing the old man for stealing his trophies. But the assassin's path was blocked by a colossal wave of flames that suddenly erupted straight from beneath the earth. The maniac abruptly stopped, sliding in the mud and staring in shock at the giant energy entity ahead. His eyes widened with genuine primal horror as he felt the true deadly power of the old man's aura. From the darkness emerged a gigantic, ghostly hand, blindly calling the allies of the castle of the heavenly demon to certain death. Shrouded in poisonous radiance, the master discarded everything, keeping only the title of the soul-killing, poisonous hand, and cold-bloodedly set out to tear the souls of his enemies.